Oh, happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to Irish Breakdown. It is another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. It's Friday. It's a free-for-all mailbag. It's all of the above. My favorite day of the week, Brian, and I'm not afraid to tell anybody that wants to listen. It's my favorite day of the week. And so we're going to jump right in, Brian, unless you've got something else you want to cover before we get
I'm ready
going.
to go, man. I'm ready to answer questions.
Yes.
I thought I had so much fun doing the Wednesday mailbag. It's like kind of made me think back to the summer when we pretty much like did mailbags like almost every day.
I know, right?
Like it just was fun. And I thought there was great questions on Wednesday. And I was like, man, I hope we didn't use up all of our good questions this week on Wednesday, and then we don't have any for Friday. But I have faith. I have faith in my brothers and sisters in the Irish Breakdown family.
Absolutely.
That they're gonna come correct today. So I'm excited about it. So I'm ready to.
Absolutely. So just a quick reminder, we will hit more team stuff in the first hour, and then your recruiting questions. If you've got specific recruiting questions, hold off on those until the second hour when Ryan is in here. So, for obvious reasons. So just want to throw that out there, a little caveat. But Q Kibbs in the queue.
I'm sorry. I can't imagine. It kills me how often people talk about the clothes that I wear, the hats that I wear or don't wear, my facial hair. Like, I mean, I have hair, and every now and then I like to not have a hat on. But apparently, we're not going to get any good questions because,
I just went down to the bottom.
Obsessed with my hair. So,
yeah, they are. Holy cow.
I like this. And no, this is not the first show I've gone without a hat. It's just not often. But I just felt like,
you know what? That's okay.
Going without a hat today. So
who's the new guy? Wow. Okay. All right.
So now that we've gotten past my
now
that we've gotten past my decisions for articles of clothing today and my facial hair, and when I get new glasses here soon, it's gonna. Some people
are gonna lose their mind.
It's gonna like this the end of what was that scene? The Kingsman, right? Just when everybody's like head started exploding.
Yeah,
right?
that's
like
exactly.
Yep.
Just be prepared for it because it's gonna happen.
Yep. So let's get rolling, man.
We can do that. Q Kibbs in the queue here right off the bat. He says, "Might be a dumb question." I was told as a teacher there are no dumb questions.
That's just a total lie.
But I'll disagree with that.
That's a total lie.
Yeah, there are dumb questions, but this is not one of them. What exactly does closing on a recruit entail? Keep doing what you've been doing, or is there another layer?
It depends. I mean, this is the thing: is there's never one thing. The best closers in college football are the ones that can really read young men and their families. And for some kids, it's going to be the close is going to be, I got to get mom and dad on my side, because at the end of the day, mom and dad are going to be the ones that are going to push this decision, right?
Yep.
Man, the head coach is really big into, this kid's is really influenced by the head coach.
Or sometimes maybe it's an uncle or like your
so
trainer
one,
or whatever.
That is true of every kid is you got to find out who the decision influencers are in his family. Like that's number one, and really make sure that you're working on those people. And then after that, it's about, and I think for Notre Dame, it's a unique close because Notre Dame has always prided itself on, hey, look, if we're going to get a kid here, we're going to get a kid here under the proper pretenses. We're not going to tell him it's one thing and then it gets here and it's a completely different universe. And we're going to be honest with a kid. But then it's about, finding out what are the important things to him, right? Is it playing time? Is it this? Is this that? And then being able to kind of tailor your message to him. Now, again, this tailoring message doesn't mean you're dishonest, you're lying. But for example, I'll give you a story, right? I remember talking to Liam Eichenberg when he was coming out of high school. He had committed Notre Dame. Urban Meyer wasn't happy about that. He really wanted Liam Eichenberg. And Urban Meyer was the primary person recruiting Liam Eichenberg. So he kept calling him up. Hey, look, you're going to come in. You're going to start at guard for us as a true freshman. He kept telling him all these kind of things. And I remember Liam saying, he was like, he thinks that's going to work, but like, I don't think I'm ready to start as a true freshman. Right. Like that's not really knowing what's going to influence that player.
Right.
So you're giving a message that's not going to really.
It's not resonating with them. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's about finding out what's going to resonate, what matters to the kid, what questions, especially for Notre Dame, what are the hangups? What are the things? And this is to me a big one for the close. obviously it's about, you have to have a connection and a relationship and all that. But part of that has to be, what are the things keeping him from being here? Well, this team has this, or this school has this, or he's concerned about that, or this school has convinced him he can't handle it academically.
Right.
That happens a lot with kids that Notre Dame doesn't get. Other schools will convince them that they can handle it academically at Notre Dame, which I find disgusting, but it's just a fact, right?
Right.
So it's the
easiest way to recruit against Notre Dame, though.
Correct.
Right? That and
it's
the
just
weather.
Disgusting to do it that way. To convince a young person that you're not good enough to go succeed, but come here.
Yeah, right.
Right.
You're not smart enough. Come to us.
That definitely happens a lot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But it's just about finding those things and being able to overcome those obstacles, right? The obstacles to getting Nolan Ziegler to Notre Dame was simply whether or not you were or were not going to offer him a scholarship. That was the obstacle, right? If you offered him a scholarship, he was coming, right?
Right. You saw his basement. There was no way he wasn't coming to Notre Dame.
That's rare, right? Grandparents play. His family was like a Notre Dame family, right? It's a legacy recruit. Most kids aren't that way. Most kids would say, you've got to overcome this. I don't want to go this far away from home. I have a girlfriend here. I'm not sure if I can fit that system. I want this. I want
I've never
that.
seen snow. Whatever.
All that stuff, right? And it's about making them feel more comfortable with those things. And it's not about lying to them, but it sometimes there's a little bit of gamesmanship. If a kid's really worried about the snow, maybe you don't bring him in February. Wait till the Blue Gold game in April, where it's still going to be cold, but not snow on the ground, most likely cold.
Right.
All right. I shouldn't say that because, knock on wood, that means, we're going to have snow in late April. We've had snow in May in South Bend before.
Baseball starts in 2 weeks, okay? So if the snow can leave at any point, okay?
Yeah.
Just putting it out there.
So really, but Q-Kips, it varies from kid to kid. And if you're a coach who only has one move, right? Like you're that dude at the dance, the club that's got that one move and he's just going to keep doing it and doing it and doing it. That guy's not going home with a lot of chicks, right? That guy's not getting a lot of numbers. That guy's not getting a lot of free drinks, right? He's gonna be funny and all that, but it's not gonna work, right? Same thing with recruiters. If you got one move, it'll work with some kids, but your success rate isn't gonna be high.
Yeah.
The thing that I think has made Marcus Freeman such a good recruiter, for example, was he's a real genuine dude who gets to know kids on a personal level, right? Like I think those are the effective recruiters, and it's like. But when you get to know a kid on a personal level, what really matters to him. What the things are going to influence him, the people that are going to influence him. So if you're recruiting Tyson Ford, if we don't get Mama on our side, we got no chance.
100%. Yes, that's a great example.
Right.
Great example.
And so make sure that the Mama's happy, right? And then we'll have a chance to get him. But then also make sure that Tyson's happy.
Absolutely.
Right? Because it's not just about, maybe Tyson's mom could have influenced him to come here, but if Tyson wasn't as on board as Mama was, he was going to be miserable when he got here. He's going to end up leaving, right? So you got to make sure that you're being able to do that. But what are the things that are going to keep Tyson Ford happy or make Tyson Ford want to come is going to be different than what's going to make Josh Burnham or Jalen Sneed or Benjamin Morrison, right?
Right.
And the best recruiters can figure out how can we connect with this kid? How can we answer his questions? How can we make him feel more comfortable with making this tough decision? Because picking Notre Dame is often not the easy decision.
Sure.
It's not the decision most people around you are going to try to get you to make. It's not the decision a lot of your peers are going to push you to make unless you are, from a Catholic school or, from this area. And even then, it's like Vince, you and I both know there's a lot of non-Notre Dame fans in this area.
Tons.
Which is kind of crazy. I understand it now, but I didn't understand it when I first moved into the area. But that to me is about closing, and it's just about being able to answer all those questions, and it's the relationship, and it's just knowing what buttons to push to get him to say yes. That's really what it boils down to. And closing also entails, once you get a commitment, making sure that kid doesn't take a back seat.
Exactly. You got to continue to recruit.
Closing doesn't really happen until signing day.
Yeah, exactly right. Once you get a kid committed, you've got to keep, because we've seen multiple times where guys just get put on the back burner after they commit. And especially when you get those early commitments and you're talking like a year away and they're just kind of forgotten about, well, he's committed. We don't got to worry about him. Well, yeah, you do. You still got to show some
Devin
love,
Moore,
man.
Right?
Yeah.
Like Devin Moore. That's one. You had him committed for a long time. You had CJ Williams committed for 4 or 5 months. Devin Moore even longer, I believe. Like about a month longer.
Yeah.
So yeah, you've got to close. If we went back and looked at some of the players that Notre Dame lost in the first 4 or 5 years of Brian Kelly's tenure, you'd be like, man, what would have been like if they could have got that guy or the kids that they were the number 2 option for? I mean, you could have had, very early on in Brian Kelly's tenure, I mean, you could have had a starting cornerback tandem of Kavari Russell and Ronald Darby.
Yeah.
Imagine what that would have looked like. You know what I mean? Like, imagine what that duo would have been. But because he was committed, Ronald Darby was committed in the 2011 class, and then they just stopped paying attention to him. They stopped really focusing on him. They stopped really, really saying, "Hey, look, you're a priority for us." They just stopped. What was it? Eric Reed? No, not Eric Reed. I always forget his. I get the 2 Reed brothers mixed up. But you look at things like Notre Dame not being able to close on I want to say Jordan Reed. Why am I drawing a blank here? I can't believe I'm Justin Reed, right? Sorry, Justin Reed. But you think about some of the Paulson Adebo, right? Just some of the guys that Notre Dame wasn't able to close on that they had committed, right? Reed they didn't have committed. He went somewhere else. But like the point being that you were finished number 2 on a lot of guys that were really good players, and you've lost some guys that you had committed to you at some point in time. You often wonder, like, what would it have been like if they could have closed the deal on that? And that's just kind of the thing that gets you a little fired up. Justin Reed.
Yep.
But it just kind of, that's the thing for me is you got to be a great closer to be a great recruiter. But how you do it's going to be different from every kid. The one thing that has to be consistent is it's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. Yeah. And you have to be invested. Like you have to be emotionally invested in order to be a good recruiter. You just do. And it makes it harder when you lose guys, but it makes you work harder too.
Some guys can get away with that. Some guys are really good,
faking it. Yeah.
Salesmen.
Right.
And
that's true.
But most, to your point, I'm just kind of saying that kind of to be funny, but
yeah,
for the most part, your point is accurate.
Right. I feel like I can get my BS detector out, and I'm going to know whether a recruiter is being honest with my kid and genuine and all that. You know what I mean? But I guess we'll see. I'm still a little ways away from that yet, but and he won't be being recruited by D1 football. So
never know, man. That kicking,
unless his leg gets a lot stronger. I don't know. He better be with how much I spent on cleats last night. All right, here we go. Next one from John A1. Do you expect Clarence Lewis to be able to hold off Ryan Barnes? And then he kind of has a follow-up. If Ryan Barnes wins the job, will the defense shift to more of a left cornerback, right cornerback versus the field and boundary?
Yeah, and I think the thought being there is because you'd have 2 6'3" guys.
Right.
You'd have 2 really tall guys.
And Cam Hart and Ryan.
Yeah. I would like to see them really this offseason focus on going away from that. And the reason I say it's more for the 2022 season because
going away from field boundary.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but a buddy of mine the other day was talking to me, and we were having a conversation about nose tackles and how he's concerned that Notre Dame doesn't have a big nose tackle on this roster. I said, well, let me ask you a question. Who are the 5 best offenses Notre Dame's going to face this year? And we went through it, and he went through he's one of those guys that's got to pull up the schedule and go through every school. And we came down to some version of, USC, Ohio State, Clemson, Boston College, and BYU or North Carolina and Boston College. It's the 5 best offenses they're going to face this year. And I said, how many of those teams do you think a big nose tackle is going to help you against? How many of those teams do you look at and say, gee, I wish we had Lewis Nix? Maybe Boston College. Maybe. But the rest of them, it's like a 320-pound nose tackle is not going to help you in that game.
Because they're not trying to run power football. Right. They're just not.
And so that's the thing is like you've got to look at anything you've got to look at in context. And so when I look at the corner tandem to John's question, I would hope that they would go away from field boundary because you don't want to be getting stuck in the opener, especially, just the first game of the year. You don't want to be getting stuck in situations against Ohio State where you're trying to flip sides of the field at corner and safety. You just don't want to be there. We saw that in the bowl game. They had a hard time handling Oklahoma State's tempo. Notre Dame was just not prepared for that because there's so much field boundary, which I understand. Against last year's schedule in the regular season, it made more sense to be field boundary. I mean, there's advantages to that against Purdue. There's advantages to that against Wisconsin. There's advantages to that, against some of the better Cincinnati, right? And so this schedule's different. So to your point, I hope that they go away from the field boundary no matter who starts. But I think especially if you get those two tall guys, there's more merit to it. Do I expect Clarence Lewis to be able to hold off Ryan Barnes? I don't know, honestly, John. I'm gonna kind of cheat a little bit and say I really don't know. I don't know what work Ryan Barnes has put in this offseason. I'll say this. I saw Notre Dame the other day.
He looked real good in that one. I know you're going to bring up the same thing I'm thinking about.
They sent out like 4 or 5 tweets of just like 3 or 4 shots of the players working out. And Ryan, look, he's put on some good upper body weight.
Yeah.
Right?
Because he was real lanky, skinny-ish.
Missed his senior year of high school because of COVID.
But
he was one of those
his
guys.
Length still stood out to you, but he's putting on some bulk on that length, which is fantastic.
Right.
Yeah.
So my hope is that he makes a transition, and and he kind of just had a screwy first year. He had COVID and missed some time, and an injury and missed some time, and But I hope that he's able to push Clarence Lewis. Do I expect him to beat him out? No. Part of me, because I'm going to be honest. I'm a little concerned defensively that they are too veteran centric. Again, that's just based off one season. But I just have a hard time that at no point in time last year, no point in time.
We talked about this yesterday a little bit.
Bad as Clarence Lewis was against Wisconsin. And again, if Graham Mertz had any kind of downfield accuracy, Clarence would have given up 2 big plays in the pass game against Wisconsin last year. Cincinnati went at him and had success on him, right? Obviously, Oklahoma State went on him, and other teams had success on him. And there was
he was the target.
Play. He was also the guy that was too aggressive and got beat on that long pass against Florida State that Kyle Hamilton came backside to pick off. I believe that was Clarence that got sucked up on that play too. So it wasn't just the Oklahoma State game Oklahoma State was the worst game of the year, but he had some issues at other times. But at no point in time did they think twice about putting Philip Riley or Ryan Barnes or Chance Tucker in the game. That concerns me. Were they that far behind? And if they were that far behind, what makes me think that in 15 spring practices, they're going to, and in fall camp, that they're going to come out and beat out Clarence Lewis for the starting job? I'm not optimistic about that. I hope I'm wrong. And that's not a knock on Clarence Lewis. I hope they have really tough decisions to make about who starts, because it's always a tough decision to bench a starter.
Absolutely.
It's never easy.
And he's like a 2-year starter. I mean, a year and a half.
Basically.
Yeah. And that would take some cojones to bench a 2-year starter. It just would, right? I mean,
right.
So
if you put a young guy in and he gets beat, it's going to come back on you.
Absolutely.
Right, as a coach.
Sure.
But that's why you get paid the big bucks to make those decisions. So
absolutely.
I have a lot of confidence in Mike Mickens, and so far he hasn't done anything to hurt that. This is a big offseason for him.
Yeah.
Right. This is a big offseason for Mike Mickens, because this is the offseason where Mike Mickens gets to prove, hey, I'm the coach that Driscoll and Coach Freeman and everybody thinks I am, because I'm the guy that recruited and was the first one to develop Sauce Gardner and Kobe Bryant and Nick Johnson at Bowling Green, and he's got a track record of producing top corners. Well, last year, cornerback play opposite Cam Hart wasn't very good.
Right.
And so is that a lack of talent? Did Coach Mick not do as good of a job? That type of thing. That's what we're going to find out. And to me, you've got some talent there. You've got Philip Riley going into year 2. You've got Ryan Barnes, and everybody knows how I feel about Ryan Barnes. You've got Chance Tucker, who, had a lot of injuries last year, but before the injuries, the staff was very high on Chance and his speed. You've got Jaden Mickey showing up this spring. You're going to have Benjamin Morrison showing up in the fall. I just feel like there's now too much talent, and some of the young talent has enough experience to where I don't think you can justify just keep trotting out Clarence Lewis every game unless he's going to get a lot better. Because that's the other part of this too. What if Clarence gets a lot better? It's not just about, why are we assuming that we're not? It's a rhetorical, hypothetical. Like, why would we assume that Clarence Lewis, as from a sophomore to junior years, is going to be the same dude? Why are we not talking about how much better he's going to be?
Absolutely.
But he's going to have to show that he's a lot better. And so it's going to be interesting. But my hope is that he gets beat out or makes a big jump. Those are the two things that have to happen, in my opinion, for for Clarence Lewis for Notre Dame to have success at cornerback. He's either going to have to get beat out or he's going to have to get a lot better. Because when we look at the schedule, there's a lot better passing teams on the schedule this year than there were last year. And that's they're going to need some dudes to including Cam Hart, all of them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Cam Hart needs to take his game to another level. There's no question about it. Yeah,
absolutely.
I think he's just scratching the surface, but
but now he's got to go out and do it.
Right. We talk about that in our monthly meetings.
The one good thing in this question is, as I said, I don't expect Cam Hart to be completely full go every day in the spring. So I do think there's going to be tons of opportunities for those guys. And so let's say Ryan Barnes is playing a lot of opposite Clarence, because there's a chance that Ryan Barnes, if I'm right about Cam Hart, then Ryan Barnes is going to be playing a lot opposite Clarence Lewis. If he plays really well, is it a thing where he stays in that role, right? And they move Cam Hart over, or do they then move Ryan Barnes over to compete with Clarence Lewis?
Right.
That would be my question, sort of coming out of the spring.
We do have a super chat, Brian, from AJ. Thank you very much, AJ. Which is more detrimental to a team? A head coach that is too involved and overbearing with his coordinators, or one that is barely involved?
That's a great question.
That's a really good question.
But I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna give you a couple different answers, because I can't say which one, because it always depends on who the coach is, right?
Sure.
Like, my issue with Brian Kelly for many, many years was that he was not involved enough. Well, I thought Brian Kelly for a time there was a pretty darn good football coach and needed to be more involved. He needed to kind of, direct the ship more than he did as a team. Not so much with, like, he wanted to direct things where he shouldn't have, which is, we're going to run this type of offense and this, when you're not involved enough in the day-to-day to be telling people what they should or shouldn't be calling during games. But, I've said before, I had coaches tell me, like, we don't have staff meetings. We maybe once a week. And I'm like, that's absurd. Like, Ohio State, Bama, they start off with staff meetings every day. Everybody, in the morning. Nope, not here. Everybody's just kind of doing their own thing.
Okay.
But it's just a lack of being involved. And so that's a problem. That, to me, a coach being barely involved is a problem if the coach is a good coach. Brian Kelly was a good coach. I've never said he wasn't a good coach. I just said his time at Notre Dame needed to be over. He'd done what he could do, and he just wasn't the same guy. He needed a new challenge. Notre Dame needed a new coach. It is what it is.
Right.
But there are other head coaches, and if you have a good staff, and I'm like, I wish he was less involved, because that guy's not a good coach. And his coordinators are kind of carrying him. Then there's the opposite of, a guy that's too involved and overbearing. If he's not a great coach, that's really problematic, really problematic. But you know who else that describes too involved and overbearing? Describes Nick Saban. When he worked out pretty well, right? So with anything at the end of the day, it's always going to be about the quality of the coach. What's the quality of the coach, right? And because if a coach is really, really good, you're gonna want him really involved. If a coach isn't really good, then you're going to want him taking a back seat to the assistant. So it just depends on who the specific coach is. I'd say in general, it just in theory with no context, my answer would be the barely involved one.
Yeah.
Because then you have just another lack of leadership and direction
in
the football program.
Because as a football coach, I would want to have an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator to run their side of the ball. I want that to be their side of the ball. But those guys are both meeting with me, and we're having discussions about what's going on both their sides of the ball. Like, I'm involved. You know what I mean? But I want them to own it, and I don't want to micromanage it, but I still want to be involved. Like, that's how I would run it. So it's kind of a happy medium, I guess, is what you would want, right, with this. But that's how I treat my staff from a baseball staff too. Is like, I want you guys to own your position groups, who you're working with, and everything. But the buck stops with the head coach, and I want to know what you're going to be doing before you do it.
Right.
You know what I mean? So yeah, it's interesting to see how different head coaches attack that job and how they treat their coordinators and their coaches and all that. so far, I've really liked what I've heard from Marcus Freeman about how he wants each position coach to be the head coach of that position, right? And that also involves recruiting and the drill work and the film stuff, all of that. He wants his guys to have a leadership role. You know that he's leading them as well. And I think that's really important. He's saying all the right things. I believe he's implementing all of those things because he did it as a defensive coordinator with his position coaches. So I could only imagine he's going to continue doing that as a head coach. But yeah, there's a happy medium, AJ. And I think that's a really good question, though, because it's difficult for a head coach to not be overbearing at times, especially when it's a side of the ball that you came up on. You know what I mean? And that's going to be a challenge for Marcus Freeman on the defensive side of the ball.
Yep. Got the next question ready?
I am finding one. Here we go. From John. Which position group on defense needs to make the most progress? I think it's a toss-up between two for me, between corner and linebacker, but I'm going to stick with linebacker because I think linebacker is a very important position in this defense. And I feel like there's a big jump that this group can make. And I think they can make it, but I think they need to make the most progress.
I think I agree with the point that they can make a big jump. What I don't agree with is the need that they need to make a bigger jump than anybody else, because I still think at times last year the linebacker play was pretty good. I don't know that I could point to a time last year when I felt like the other cornerback opposite opposite Cam Hart was playing really well. I think, and again, it goes back to the schedule, right? Notre Dame's corners, if they don't play well, it doesn't matter what the linebackers do to a degree. You know, I mean, you're just, if you're as bad as you were against Oklahoma State at corner, it doesn't matter. Or against North Carolina. I mean, think about some of the big plays and the bad mistakes they made in that game. You know, if you play like that, it won't matter what your front seven. You know, we've always said a great front seven can make a mediocre secondary better. That's Absolutely. True. But at the end of the day, when you're playing the best of the best teams, or the best of the best, not the best of the best teams, but the best of the best units, the one you're facing, it won't matter. They're going to make plays. They're going to make plays on you.
Right.
And so to me, I think cornerback has to, because I feel like you can scheme your way to success with linebackers aren't really good. I feel like cornerback's one of those positions where when you're playing the best teams on your schedule, you can't protect them with scheme unless you have Kyle Hamilton back there. So, and the other thing is, if you're protecting with scheme, you're taking away from the safeties being able to do other things to make your defense effective. So I'm absolutely going cornerback. I think cornerback's the position where Mike Mickens is either going to deserve a big raise this offseason, or we're going to be like, hey, he's not doing what he should have done, right? Or what I think he's capable of doing. Well, I think one of those two things is going to be true. My hope is that it's the former. It's the if you look at the teams that Notre Dame played and how they played, man, those corners played above what we thought maybe their potential was, or their talent was, or their experience was, or whatever the case may be. You know, that dude, you need to make sure that dude doesn't go anywhere, right? Because he did a great job. I hope that's the storyline when we come out of the 2022 season.
Cool. See, we don't agree on everything, everybody. Just putting it out there. Scott has a good question. I think this is a fun one, and he says it's a fun one. Where is your favorite place to sit or prefer to watch a game? End zone, 50-yard line, corners. Just curious. Thanks, guys. Well, I mean, I like the 50-yard line. I'm not going to lie, but it has to be high up. I can't
really
stand being down. If I'm watching the game, I don't like being close to the field. Yeah. Okay, I don't like that at all. If I'm head coach, I want to be on the field. If I'm any other thing besides the head coach, I want to be up in the box. Yeah. So I like being up high. When I would watch my son's football games, for example, when I wouldn't talk myself into the box as a parent, and I would just do the PA announcing or something like that because I like that view, I would sit up in the top row of the bleachers. That's where I like to watch games.
When I'm coaching, I like to be at the 50-yard line and high. As an analyst, I kind of like being somewhere around the 40s, maybe to the 35, somewhere in there, because I feel like it gives me more room to kind of see behind one of the sides of the field. Where when you're at midfield, I mean, there's a good chunk of the field where you're just kind of right there with them, even with them, which is a good, great view for watching the game. It's the best view to just sit and watch. But as far as for work, like what I need to accomplish for work, I kind of like being just a touch off of midfield. But anywhere between 35 to 35 and high is a phenomenal view for me. Where I hate is I hate being in the end zone. Hate being in the end zone. Whether it's as a fan or as an analyst, there's no time that I like being in the end zone. And we had the Notre Dame BC game in 2015 in Fenway. So it's on a baseball field, right? Well, the way that it worked is the field went from sort of the third baseline out to right field. Well, if you think about where a press box is in a Major League Baseball stadium, it's like right behind the home plate. We're like, I was literally where I sat was so like if you know what the press box looks like, if you've ever seen Moneyball, the scene at the end of the movie where he's talking to the owner of the Red Sox, that's actually in the press box. So I've been kind of in there, and it literally is looking right down the middle of the goalposts.
Right.
Hated it.
Yeah.
Hate it because you couldn't see what's on the other side. Right. Because it's not like the all 20, the cut-ups we do, Vince, where the camera's high and you're kind of looking down so you can see the techniques. Nope. We were looking right through the backs of the guys. It was terrible.
Yeah. So as a coach, I love the end zone view, but you're zoomed.
The end zone view on film is a whole lot different than 100%. The end zone view sitting in the stands.
Right. I just wanted to clarify that. I wanted to clarify the difference because the end zone view as a coach from the film is so important, especially from an offensive line point of view.
It's important, but if you can only do one view, you can't go with the tight. You can't go with the end zone view if you're only going to do one. Like let's say you only have access to one, wide or tight.
Well, it's all 22.
You got to go with the
absolutely, because you can see everything. If I'm an offensive line coach, I want the tight behind. I want the end zone view. If I'm an offensive line coach, that's what I want.
To a degree.
I want to be able to see splits. I want to be able to see first steps.
You need both.
That stuff.
You need both.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, for sure. For sure. When they started coming up with the end zone views for high school, man, that was a game changer, man. That's all I'm going to say.
It's got one for you, Vince, from John A1. Throwing in a question for Vince to see if we can get him from behind the scenes. Does playing baseball complement football the way wrestling and basketball does? I'm very curious to hear your opinion on this because I have a very strong opinion on this.
Ooh, okay. I first of all, as a whole, I think playing another sport is ridiculously important. Plain and simple. I think baseball can help. For example, I think baseball can help an offensive lineman with his footwork. I absolutely think that. I'm trying to get the starting guard from the football team to play first base for me because I think he needs help with his footwork, and I think I can help him with his footwork, right? Because you need to be mobile. I also think playing outfield can be very beneficial to a defensive back because it's a lot of the same hip movements, opening your hips and going after fly balls and things like that. I think can be very, very beneficial to you. Fast twitch movement. I think running the bases can be beneficial to any position on the football field. And then, of course, if you've got a guy throwing freaking darts as a quarterback, why would you not want him to come and pitch for you? Because I can guarantee you if he can throw darts with a football, he could probably throw it over the plate as well. So I'm a huge proponent of multi-sport athletes. I would never want a kid to specialize in high school. I think baseball can absolutely help a football player, and I will take that one to my grave.
I think baseball can help football players in certain ways. I will say the one position I hate is pitchers and quarterbacks because I feel like pitching and because I was a pitcher and a quarterback, and I feel like it's two completely different throwing motions, and it can jack a guy up, in my opinion. It can jack your, and I think it jacks your. Kind of feel like it jacks your football throwing motion off a little bit more than it does your baseball. I've said throwing a football is a lot more like hitting a baseball than it is pitching a baseball because the wider base, the core, the hip turn, the coil, and all that kind of stuff. But I think baseball can help with that. I feel like if a kid is going to play another sport, to help him get better prepared for football, baseball would be well down my list for most players. If it's a lineman, I want them playing basketball or wrestling, right? And doing shot put and things like that in the spring. Because I just feel like those things are going to, because wrestling compared to baseball, I think baseball can help a lineman's footwork and stuff like that. You're right. But there's no point where he can just go hit somebody without getting kicked off the team.
No, there's not. There's definitely not.
Right. So whereas wrestling is
I would be
very
pushing,
important in wrestling.
Absolutely. I think wrestling is probably the best other sport to play.
But then wrestling's over and then baseball starts. And then I say I'd rather him go throw the shot, do the discus, like something that requires the hand-eye coordination, something like that, right? Like I'd say those type of things. When it comes to football, the position I think is best suited. This is going to sound funny because it matters for Notre Dame. I think the position that baseball best helps, in my opinion, is running backs and linebackers, because baseball has so much lateral movement,
right,
and change of direction, and hand-eye coordination and footwork and things like that. I feel like for receivers, it can help a little bit, like with fly balls, tracking balls and things like that. But like, I'd be more of a track basketball than track guy for like a receiver or corner. But I would say if I had to pick between the two, I'd rather a defensive back play baseball than a receiver play baseball, because I feel like in a corner there's so much opening and running as an outfielder, right, Vince? I mean, where
that's what I was talking about. It's opening your hips. It's the same movement. I don't know what
baseball does for a wide receiver. Like, not that a receiver can't be a great baseball player. It's just that I don't know how much baseball helps a receiver with that, other than hand-eye coordination.
Oh, it doesn't.
It's important.
No, it doesn't. Like I said, I think defensive back could be a great middle, a corner outfielder, like that kind of thing.
Shortstop, center field. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Yes, no question.
Yeah, but if you're talking about a big guy, he's going to be a wrestler in the winter, and he's going to be a shot putter, a discus guy in the winter or spring. That's absolutely what I would do, in my opinion. But
so have my guy talk to you.
But to your point, I just want kids to play more sports.
Absolutely.
Play more sports. Number one, you get one shot at being a teenager. This is the one sad thing that I feel that we've seen from college football becoming such a big business, basically, is young people are being forced to give up their high school careers in a lot of ways. Phil Dracovic actually caught a lot of flack from people for not enrolling early at Notre Dame. The reason he didn't enroll early at Notre Dame,
basketball.
He wanted to play basketball.
Yeah.
Right. And lead his team to state championship. And I loved that he made that decision.
Me too. Absolutely.
But it hurt him being able to play as a freshman in football. Okay, so what? I wish Tyler Buckner wouldn't have stopped playing lacrosse. I get why he did it, the knee injury and just,
right.
But that's another sport that I think is great for, I don't know how to play lacrosse. I don't understand lacrosse, but I understand athleticism. And I watch lacrosse and I'm thinking, that's a great football sport. That's a great off-season sport for football players to play. A lot of conditioning, a lot of sprinting, a lot of physicality, great hand-eye coordination thing. Like, it takes a ton of hand-eye coordination to be able to play lacrosse. A lot of change of direction. I mean, that's a sport that I'm surprised more football players don't play lacrosse. Now, I understand part of it is because it's more of let's be honest, it's more of a
niche sport.
No, not niche. It's niche. Why is it niche? It's niche because there's a certain class of people that tend to play lacrosse, right?
Generally, yes.
Like the reason I could play football as a kid growing up, we weren't wealthy, is because all I needed was a football and a pair of shoes.
Right.
Right. Like a basketball. If you have a basketball, you can go find a place to play basketball.
Sure.
Baseball event used to be that way.
Yes, because the Little League and everything else.
Baseball went away from that, and it's like you had to have money to play baseball growing up.
Right. Which is why my kid never played baseball.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But like soccer, that's part of the reason I think soccer is such a worldwide sport. There's a lot of poverty around the world. You don't have to be rich to play soccer. You just need a stinking ball.
Yeah.
Right. Same thing with basketball. I mean, you don't even need a rim technically to work on basketball.
It's true.
I mean, look, there's been plenty of times when I was younger and I'd be at a relative's house and I had a basketball, but there was no rim nearby. You just got to work on your handle. You're shooting up against the brick. You know what I mean? The brick wall. You're just working on passing against the brick wall, things like that. Can't do that in baseball, really. I mean, you need like the net. It's a financial investment. I think that's why more kids don't play lacrosse. It's not a sport that just your average lower middle class family can afford to play.
Well,
and it's also not offered at a lot of.
Exactly.
I never heard of lacrosse.
It's a club sport in Indiana. It's not even IHSA.
When I moved, I never heard of lacrosse in Ohio. Never heard of it. Moved to Virginia and heard of lacrosse, but the only schools that played lacrosse were like the private schools, Norfolk Academy, Cape Henry Collegiate. Like, we didn't have that at public schools.
Right.
You know, and then the first time I'd ever actually watched a lacrosse game wasn't until I got to college. Right. I never heard of lacrosse. So I think that's why it's a little nichey.
I still haven't watched a lacrosse game.
If it's a I have no clue what I'm looking at. Right. But you can appreciate the thing that part of the reason I hated lacrosse initially was, let's be honest, I didn't like the kids that played lacrosse because they were the rich kids that went to the private schools, right?
You said it,
didn't like those kids.
Yeah.
And then when I went to college, Salisbury was a really good lacrosse team, and their most of the lacrosse players were just giant douches. I mean, they just were.
It's true, and they still are.
But when I actually got older and actually sat there and it actually wasn't until I did this job and I'd actually watched Notre Dame's lacrosse team.
Yeah, right.
And I'm like, this is a really intense sport. Like, this is a physical sport that requires a lot of athleticism and skill and, you know, things that you appreciate. And so if you can get past sort of the other stuff, it's a really intriguing sport as far as there's a lot of carryover athletically. And it's the only other sport that I know of besides hockey where you got to wear pads, which, you know what I mean? Which I
catchers.
Like. Huh? No, catchers. That's one dude.
It's the most important dude.
Okay. Says you probably played catcher, right?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I did.
Yeah. That's just so you get with the ball. Obvious? That's so you get with the ball, right? You're not worried about getting hit by another dude, you know? So
that's right, because nobody crosses my plate.
Well, especially now with all the rules of Major League Baseball. You
can't. I mean, you got to go around. You got to slide. You got to.
Can't have these rich guys, you know, having contact in baseball. It's one of many reasons I stopped watching baseball. So it's hard.
College baseball is still fun to watch, though.
Yes, it is.
Just saying.
And Notre Dame's off to a good start.
Number 2 in the country.
Yeah,
I mean, they're really good.
Drop that walk-off. Was it Delaware? Beat them on a walk-off.
Yeah, but they're really good. Yeah. They're really good, and they're really fun to watch. I actually really enjoy watching a Link Jarrett coached team.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So,
no doubt.
Absolutely.
No doubt. Let's get back to football.
All right, if we must. Tommy Guns has the next one. Are you guys fans of the Viking saga and the Last Kingdom series? Season 5 of the Last Kingdom starts here in a week or so. It was a different language. I have no idea what any of that means.
I never saw the Last Kingdom series, but I did watch Vikings. Yeah, I watched that on. Was it the FX History? I think it was History, but I did watch that. And the last couple seasons of Vikings kind of got a little bit stupid for me, but the first several I really liked. Once Ragnar went off, it kind of got a little bit weird. But yeah, I rather enjoyed the first few seasons of Vikings. I've never seen the Last Kingdom. I've always kind of looked at it on like Netflix and different things. Like, yeah, I should probably check that out. I just haven't done it yet. So, but yes,
I have nothing to add. I apologize, Tommy. I've got nothing to add. Although I will say the Abraham Lincoln one that just came out on the History Channel, excelente. Very, very good. Really enjoying that one. Jeff has the next one. Could Tyler Buckner be like Malik Willis?
Sure. You know, I think there's some carryover to their games. I'd have to watch Malik Willis a lot more to say this definitively, but I think there's some carryover. I think Malik Willis is a guy that can make plays with his legs first, and obviously he's developed as a passer. He's gotten better as a passer. I don't like it as a direct comp. I would say, can Tyler Buckner have the impact on the game that Malik Willis had at Liberty, or he would have had anywhere else? Yeah, sure. Yeah, he can definitely do that. I would be disappointed if Tyler Buckner is the same kind of passer as Malik Willis. I don't think Malik Willis is a great passer. I think There's been some hype about him as a thrower this offseason about how he's the best, quarterback in the draft class. And also, I don't see that. If he's the best quarterback in this draft class, it's not a good draft class.
Well,
and it's not a good quarterback.
I was going to say it's not. I mean, Kenny Pickett's the number one QB right now.
Well, some are saying it's Malik Willis. I don't see it. I think he's a very dynamic. So here's the difference between Malik Willis and Lamar Jackson, right? Because I think there's going to be obvious Lamar Jackson comparisons.
Sure.
Lamar always had a better arm and was a better passer than he was ever given credit for. I mean, people forget, Lamar Jackson threw for I think over 3,500 yards one year at Louisville. At Louisville, also, he ran a pro style. Like Bobby Petrino did a really nice job of incorporating with Lamar a pro style pass attack into the read zone runs. But when Lamar had to throw, he was reading pro style stuff. I mean, his last year at Louisville, he threw for 3,660 yards. The year he won I think he won the Heisman Trophy in 2015, right? He threw for 3,500 yards, 30 touchdowns, 9 picks. Now his completion percentage was lower; it's in the 50s because there was a lot of vertical shots, and his receivers dropped a lot of balls those 2 years. But I don't think Malik Willis has shown me the feel for the game and the feel for processing reads and throwing on time and anticipation that I always thought Lamar had, right? You could see it with Lamar, but we focus so much on how dynamic of a runner he is that we kind of lost that part of it. So, when I look at Malik Willis and I compare him to, other mobile run throw quarterbacks like a Deshaun Watson,
right?
When I think of Josh Allen, he is more Josh Allen when he was coming out of Wyoming.
Okay.
Meaning, Josh was real raw, but you could see some of the things with Josh Allen. But Malik doesn't have Josh Allen's physical tools. He's not as big. His arm's not as strong. I just don't see it. I don't see Kyler Murray when I look at Malik Willis. I don't see Deshaun Watson when I look at Malik Willis. I just don't see that kind of player when it comes to those guys were dynamic athletes, but they also knew how to read a defense and get the ball out on time and do this and do that. And I just don't see that from Malik Willis. That's just me. So that's where I think the comparison would end for me would be the pass game. But as far as how his legs can impact the game, absolutely, I think Tyler Buchner can have that kind of impact. So that's just my 2 cents. Now, again, that's off watching just a little bit of Liberty film. I downloaded the other day about 4 or 5 all 22 games for Liberty this year. So I'm going to go watch more of him.
Look at
you. And I may come back and change my mind. Right, as we get close to the draft.
You're trying to keep up with Ryan, aren't you, with the draft prep?
No, you know me, man. I always do stuff like that. So now it's just I have someone to talk about it.
Yeah, with. Right.
Exactly. Somebody else that's as big of a draft nerd as I am, right? So
right.
I have someone to discuss it with. Like the other day, I was driving around and I called Ryan and I was like, "Hey, man, tell me your opinion of Aiden Hutchinson." Because I just don't see it with him. Like I see everybody
talking about him being a top
the number 1 pick. I'm like, he's like a late first round pick guy to me. You know what I mean? Like I just don't see it with
There's a lot of hype around him.
They're acting like this is the next Joey Bosa, Nick Bosa, Chase Young kind of guy. And I'm like, I don't see it. If I had to pick between the two, I'm taking Ajabo, in my opinion. So I asked Thibodeau? Ryan,
is he up there too for
you?
I
just mean between the two Michigan guys.
Okay.
Between the two Michigan guys.
Gotcha.
I'd take Ajabo over Hutchinson. I'd definitely take Kayvon Thibodeau over him. There's no question about it.
He's talking about dropping into the low 8, 9, 10 area.
If I'm somebody picking 8, 9, I'm like, oh God, please.
Yeah, that's what I thought
too. As a Broncos fan, I'm like, oh please let him drop to 9. Please let him drop to 9. That would be phenomenal. But it was nice to have someone that I feel like has actually broken down the film.
Yeah, right.
And Ryan actually agreed with me. We neither of us kind of see Hutchinson for what he's being hyped up to be. Like when I look at the impact he had on the game as a defensive player, and he was the Heisman runner-up, and I look at the impact Manti had in 2012, it's not even close. Not even close. He had a couple of nice games, but Manti just took over games as a Mike linebacker.
Yeah,
I saw that from Ajabo.
It's hard to do.
Hutchinson did that against Ohio State. But Ohio State's offensive line wasn't very good last year.
Right.
So it just didn't, and he disappeared against Georgia. I mean, just flat disappeared against Georgia.
Me too. Well, he wasn't there.
Yeah. Yep. So that's my 2 cents.
Next up, Triple Deck Poe. On this day 58 years ago, 22-year-old Cassius Clay beat Sonny Liston to become the heavyweight champion of the world. The more you know.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Cassius Clay. And then for those of you who don't know, Cassius Clay eventually became Muhammad Ali.
That's right.
So, yep.
Who lived right down the road from here.
Really? He was from Gary? Was he from Gary?
No, he's right. He lived up in Michigan.
Really?
Later on, obviously,
okay.
But yeah, I mean, he lived up in Michigan. I can't remember the city, and I'm sure somebody will know the answer to that. But he was considered local the last half of his life. So, yep, absolutely.
Very interesting.
Anthony Solomon, will the gap be closed if Notre Dame gets all their commit targets in 23 to go with the 21 and 22 classes? I don't think the gap will ever be completely closed, will it?
Well, it can. I mean, it can be. I mean, eventually Notre Dame could be the most talented team in the country. Will the gap be? Look, the gap won't be closed until Notre Dame wins a championship. I mean,
exactly. Yes, agreed.
That's when the gap is closed. To your point, Anthony, I'm not gonna cop out of that answer by saying, well, until they win a championship, the gap's not closed. But the thing I would say is from a recruiting standpoint, if Notre Dame keeps all their commits, and let's just say like he says get all their commit targets in 2023. I'm assuming he means guys that they want to get to commit, right? Like the targets of to commit. Let's say they get Dante Moore and that lands to a really good receiver class, and Hiestand does what we think he's going to do, and they land at least one more really good DB, and land Jason Moore and Devin Houston type guys in the D line. And I look at that class and I stand it up to last year's class and the year before that's class. I mean, I'm going to say this, just on a God-given ability standpoint, this Notre Dame is going to go into 2024 with its most talented team in 30 years, just top to bottom. Because the thing about those two classes, you could actually find times during Brian Kelly's tenure when they actually added more, elite players, like 5-star. I mean, they landed 3 5-star ends in one class in 2011.
But not think about that. Top to bottom, though, like the depth.
Right. That's the key.
Yeah, right.
Like where now it's not Jalen Smith next to Joe Schmidt. It's like Jalen Smith next to Luke Kuechly, like it should have been. If John Tenuta wasn't like, he doesn't fit my defense, let's take Dan Fox. Which is a decision that he made, by the way. Luke Kuechly wanted to come to Notre Dame bad, but John Tenuta felt Dan Fox was the better player. Freaking, oh my gosh. Anyway, that's like wanting Michael Schofield over Zach Martin or Jake Golick over Tyler Eifert. I mean, no disrespect to any of those guys, but it's like, that's exactly what was true, actually, that when I say that. They wanted Michael Schofield over Zach Martin, and they initially liked Jake Golick more than Tyler Eifert. But anyway, that's a different comment for a different day. But I think that would be the difference, right? Like this thing we talked about is Jalen next to Joe Smith or Joe Schmidt, or Manti next to Dan Fox and Carlo Calabrese. It was or the great front from the 2012 team and Manti, and then you've got like Matthias Farley and Bennett Jackson, and nice players that have had NFL careers as kind of special teams guys. And Matthias was a 1-year starter for the Colts, but like I'd rather have some of the DBs that Bama's been trotting out, right? Like Ohio State secondaries, right? Like that's the thing, is like that's where they've been missing. As I said before, Notre Dame's top 5 in most years can compete with anybody. The difference between Notre Dame and the other teams is they haven't had that top 5. At no point in time has one of those top 5 been a QB. That's a problem. And the other problem is just 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 15, 20. There's a big gap. Yeah. And that's what would be fixed, because the last 2 classes, for the most part, there's some here and some there. I mean, obviously linebacker that came up a little bit short in 2021, receiver that came up short in 2022 in numbers. So there have been some misses. But if they hit what I think they're capable of hitting, Anthony, you won't be able to say they're not competing for a championship because they don't have enough players. You won't be able to convince me of that.
Well, the only person that was trying to convince you of that was Brian Kelly, anyway.
So. No, there were several people in the media that told us all the time what a phenomenal Brian Kelly's best coaching job ever this year. The year that Brian Kelly's teams beat 0 top 25 teams, it was Brian Kelly's best coaching job ever.
Right. I'm writing that article.
Brian Kelly was not the only person lying to people about Notre Dame's lack of talent. But he was the driver of the.
That was just like I will do what you tell me to do.
I have no comment on that. I don't want to say that because maybe that's what they genuinely thought. I do think that if you're someone who doesn't know how to watch film, let's be honest. Like Lou Samoji was this way, right? Lou would admit, like I would ask Lou his opinion on certain things. He's like, I'm not really going to give you an opinion on that. I'm like, why? He goes, I'm not qualified to do that.
But knowing that you don't know is
correct. But then that's one thing I learned from Lou is be willing to know what you don't know. So no one's ever going to send me a book to edit, right? Like that's not my deal, right? Like that, I would hand that off to Lou, right? And if somebody handed him some game tape, he'd say, "Here you go, Brian." That's why I loved working with Lou because we had such different strengths,
complemented each other,
and we both appreciated. Like Lou is way better at this than I am, and Brian's way better at this than I am. So let's focus on our strengths and then come together and put a great product out, which I thought we did when we were together. And you got to work with Lou for a little bit, so you know exactly what I'm talking about.
100%. And just so everybody know, like our goal when you and I, like you obviously started Irish Breakdown, but you and I would always talk. Like the long arching goal was to bring Lou in and have it be the three of us. Like that was the goal. Like
when he kind of retired,
right,
the plan was he was going to come right for us and do some weekly columns,
which would have been
it made me really sad that we weren't able to do that together.
I know,
but to the point is, I think that would be a thing where I don't want to say people were just blindly. Sometimes it's like, hey, I don't watch film, I can't evaluate film. This is what the coach is telling me, this is what his sidekicks are telling me, that's the story I got to tell. In fairness to them, some people are that way. Some people were just spinning it because they wanted to get and go with certain sources.
Exactly.
Some people were just reporting it as like, "Hey, look, this is what Brian Kelly's saying," and but it just so I don't want to assume that everyone that did it. Some people had nefarious agendas, but not everybody. Not everybody, in my opinion.
Jeff wants to know if you've ordered your Gap closed shirt.
No.
It's still in the idea stage.
Well, no, it's not in the idea stage. It's just
I know it hasn't been printed out.
It's like Angela's made the design. It's just I'm not gonna. Look, we're gonna have a whole month between the end of the regular season and the playoff. Like if Notre Dame would have made the playoff this year, I would have bought the shirt just in case, just to be ready. But I'd have a whole month to get that thing bought.
Yeah,
so
right.
It'll be probably closer to the end of the season when I purchase that because I don't want to have it sitting in the closet collecting dust for 5 years. I'm hoping that I can get it ordered soon, but
absolutely.
As of right now, it's still an idea. Yeah.
David has a question here. Do we have the speed at wide receiver to start to implement more end arounds, jet sweeps to keep the D guessing on the edge and open up the running game? The short answer is yes. To me.
They
should have been doing it.
Right.
Yeah. Since Braden Lindsay walked into the door, they should have been doing more of it.
Mm-hmm.
They did some, not enough. And yes, absolutely. Lorenzo Styles is fast. Chris Tyree is fast. Like there's guys that you can definitely use to do that kind of stuff. And you should be using to do that kind of stuff. 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do. Now, do they have the depth of speed that you'd ideally like? No.
Right.
But they're not there yet.
Right.
But when you got Braden Lindsay and Lorenzo Styles, you have enough speed to do that. And I'd throw Avery Davis in there too, because Avery may not have just the raw speed that Braden has, but he's got some shiftiness.
He's got some change of direction and some things like that he can make things happen in the open field.
Right. So yes, I do think they have enough to be effective, in my opinion. Now, do they need to add more of it? Yes, they do.
Mm-hmm.
But
you never have too much.
Yeah.
You can never have too much.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thomas says, how do you feel about the corner position? Who, in your opinion, will break out and step up?
That's probably the position, Vince, going into the spring I'm most concerned about is corner.
Okay.
Just because I don't have I like Clarence Lewis, but Clarence Lewis at his best and I'm going to bring Ryan in to get into this discussion too, because I want to hear both of your thoughts on this. Corner to me is the position I'm most concerned about because I don't love – if Clarence Lewis maxes out as a player, he's just a solid player. He's still not someone you want starting against Ohio State and Oklahoma and USC and Bama and, teams like that. But the players, the younger guys that I really like, I love Ryan Barnes. I like Philip Riley. I love Benjamin Morris, and I love Jaden Mickey. But they're all guys that still need, as far as we know, need time. And I don't know if they're going to be ready to play this year. So that to me is the position I'm most concerned about. Who in my opinion will break out and step up? I have no clue who will. I'll tell you who I hope steps up and breaks out. I hope that this offseason we see a big jump from Ryan Barnes and Philip Riley or Chance Tucker, like two of those three. One of Barnes or Tucker and then Riley. The reason I want Riley is because I like the idea of having a big, muscular, physical kid that I can slide into the slot against some of those air raid teams that like to run the football. Having a third corner, like let's say, Ryan, we talked Oklahoma or Ole Miss, right, Ryan? These are two teams that are air raid teams. They're going to spread you out, but they're going to run the ball. You give me a 200-pound kid like Philip Riley who's physical. Now I have a kid that can cover and a kid that can also play like a rover, right? That's hard to find, Mm-hmm. And so I hope he steps up, and then one of Barnes or Tucker for the outside, and then one of the freshmen. Like that would be my hope. So for spring, obviously that's Jaden Mickey. So my hope is that Jaden adds some competition, but one of the young outside guys I hope steps up, and I hope Philip Riley can kind of provide. Because like there's matchups you're going to want Tariq Bracy in the slot. There's other matchups like Ohio State. I'm going to like Tariq Bracy in the slot if he's playing to his potential. Against some other teams in the schedule, I may like actually having a Philip Riley more there or a safety more there because it gives you more of a dual threat type of weapon in that nickel package. That's my 2 cents. Vince, what's your thoughts on that?
Before I have to run here, I will say that I'm going to agree with what you said, but I'm also going to add, and we kind of touched on this when we were talking about corners earlier, I think Cam Hart needs to step up a little bit more. And not step up. I don't think that's the right terminology.
He's got to be more consistent.
He's got to be more consistent, and I need his game to take that next level. He did what I anticipated he was going to do as a first-year starter and a guy who's been on defense for a year and a half, right? Like that, he was there. It's time to move that game to the next level. I need him to be that lockdown corner now and be the leader in that room. So I need him. I guess you can call that stepping up. And so that's what I expect. I agree with everything you said about those other guys, but people don't talk about Cam Hart enough. I'm going to keep bringing him to the forefront. I think he needs to step up a little bit. But I'm going to take off, guys. Yep. But great job. I will talk to you later.
Thanks, Vince. So, Ryan, your thoughts on the corner position as far as just kind of where it's at right now, and then you answer the question on who, in your opinion, either do you think will step up and break out, or if you don't want to go there since we haven't seen spring practice, you can also say who you think needs to get for this group to get to where they need to get to.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at what Coach Freeman and was able to do at the University of Cincinnati, right? Like it's not quite a positionless approach as much as it's just a versatile approach on the back end, right? Like you had corners that could potentially move all over the place, that could play inside at safety in spurts, that could play nickel position. And although that's a very hard thing to find, like you're not going to have Cam Hart, in my opinion, following the best receiver into the slot a ton if that's kind of the fixture there. But the point is being that I think that on the defensive side of football, when you're talking about, Ohio State matching up, right? Like even though they lost Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, they're still going to throw out, Smith and Jigba and Gabuki or whatever his name is, Marvin Harrison Jr. Like there's still dudes that are going to be all over the place. So I think that it's a game that's becoming more and more dictated upon creating matchups. And you need matchup negators. That's what you need on the back end. Clarence Lewis, for me, I think would be a really nice depth piece, and I would actually like Clarence maybe, playing inside the slot at top points and being able to play sometimes at safety. Like I think he gives you some versatility, but I think that there's just a limited upside with him as a starter on the outside. Like I just think that he lacks a little bit of traits to be a really great player at that spot. So who needs to step up? I mean, for me, the Ryan Barnes is the first one, just because I want to see that length outside that we already have, that Notre Dame already has with Cam Hart. You have 6'2.5" there. You have another 6'2", 6'3", whatever Ryan Barnes is on the other side. Then you're talking about a lot of ability to match up against those skyscrapers that Ohio State is going to have next year in the first game. And then a guy like Philip Riley for me is another big piece, because I think Philip is that guy that can play outside for sure, but can also move inside the slot. And he could be a matchup negator, in my opinion. So those are two of the younger guys I think need to step up, because I think that you're going to get in the situation where you saw down the stretch at points, unless Clarence Lewis takes a massive step forward. That's going to be where the football is going to be thrown at, like nobody's going to throw the ball at Cam Hart next year. They know who number 5 is now. Number 6 is going to be the guy that they're going to see the Oklahoma State game and then other games where that was the weak link, the USC game, like whatever it is. And I think that you need to upgrade at that position, because it's becoming more and more important in the passing league that is predicated on matchups to be able to match up across the board. And I just don't know if Clarence gives that ability for you on the outside. On mute.
So you got to learn our strategy, because it makes it really hard when I do stupid stuff like not unmuting it, that I got to then edit it out. So just go like this.
Should we have a code word?
Just go like this, and I'll know that I'm on mute. There was a question that we had from one of the listeners about Clarence Lewis that I actually feel like this is where I wish it would go. Papa Bear asks, if CeeLoo, Clarence Lewis, gets beat out, would you think he moves to safety and free X to move to receiver? More natural cover guy in the deep backfield and explosive playmaker on offense. So yes, if that's what it took to get Xavier Watts to offense, then yes, I'm all for it. But take the Xavier Watts piece out just for a second, because I think there's enough depth at safety right now that you don't need Xavier Watts at safety. Right. They want him at safety right now because they like him at safety. Just so we're all clear. Like, he's not there as just a depth guy. They're going to give Xavier a chance to play and play a lot, which is why it's not just an easy decision to move him to receiver. So that could it free him up? Sure. But I think he could be, if they wanted him a receiver right now, they can move him to receiver right now. Or if he wanted to play, he can move right now.
Right. So it doesn't have to be a 1-for-1, right? Like,
correct.
It's not a replacement because you have that extra depth. It's just a move that you would make because you think it's the best interest.
Exactly. Now, if you were in a situation where you didn't have depth, you'd have to maybe wait to move him, but I don't think that's where they are because of Brandon Joseph. The Brandon Joseph transfer freed them up to and DJ Brown and Houston Griffith both coming back for 5th years. Gives Notre Dame enough depth, along with Ramon Henderson, along with Justin Walters, right? They have enough depth. Now, an injury could get him in a tough spot, but there's other guys you can move. Sticking specifically to the Clarence Lewis aspect of this, I believe Clarence Lewis moving to safety would be a plus addition for him, because I feel like that better. Like, here's the thing you don't want to get into. You don't want to start moving guys that aren't athletic enough to play corner to safety, because they're then going to not be athletic enough to play safety. For me, it's more about his skill set translates better there. Clarence has proved to be a solid college cornerback. He's just not the guy. Like, there's 8 teams on the schedule I have no problem with Clarence Lewis being a starting cornerback for Notre Dame against. It's more against Ohio State, Clemson, maybe BC with Zay Flowers and USC. Then I'm going to be a little bit more concerned about. I don't want him covering Mario Williams and Zay Flowers and pick a receiver from Ohio State. Just pick one out of a hat, and that's a guy that I don't want Clarence Lewis having to cover for 4 quarters. And so I do like him out. I do think his athleticism plays up better at safety or even inside at nickel, where he'd have a little bit more help inside from linebackers and over the top from a free safety. Because you don't have to play cover 2 to protect, or 4 to protect the nickel. You can much better protect the nickel with either cover 3 with the corners helping out on the outside, or cover 1 because you've got the free safeties closer to him. So I think as a nickel, as an inside guy, like, honestly, I'd flip him and Tariq Bracy. Like, that's what I would do. I would have Tariq outside, and then I'd have Clarence inside, because I think Tariq can at least run with some of those guys that he couldn't. But ideally, Ryan Barnes, Philip Riley, something like that. But to Clarence Lewis's point, I actually like him as not just that, he can't play corner, so move him to safety. No, when I look at Clarence Lewis's skill set, and I say this is a kid that has started in the Fiesta Bowl, this is a kid that has started in the Rose Bowl, a college football playoff game. This kid started in some big games. He has brought value to Notre Dame to some degree. you move him to safety, all of a sudden he becomes a plus in your lineup, in my opinion. I'm not quite, he's okay. He's a good player, but he's not a guy you want against the best of the best. You move him to safety, in my opinion, I think he becomes a plus for you. Ryan, what are your thoughts on that?
No, I think if you move him to safety too, Brian, like there's so much interchangeableness to playing safety, right? Like you can maximize a lot of things that he can do. Like you don't have to, just throw him as a pure nickel and label him that, right? Like, but he can do those things where he comes down into the slot and he works some man to man. He can work, from depth, obviously, and do a bunch of different things. I think safety allows to take advantage of the versatility he has, and to fully exploit it, right? Because I think when you're talking about a purely outside corner, he's in one spot. That's his position, whether that is field or boundary, whatever, that whole conversation. But if he's at safety, there's so many different things that you can employ safeties as that I feel like you can get him in so many different positions where, like you just said, the experience that he has, and he's had some good moments for sure, I think that you can take advantage of all the battle testedness that he's had, right? Because he's been asked to do a lot of things, hold up in the run game and cover man-to-man and cover in zone. There's a lot of aspects to his game that he's been successful in spurts at, and finding a role where you can maximize different parts of his game, I think is paramount. It's huge. And it's a big bonus for the secondary, in my opinion.
Ryan, think of the guys he's had to cover in a year and a half as a starter at Notre Dame.
I know.
I mean, it's an impressive list of dudes.
Yeah.
I mean, you have the cats at Clemson last year. He had to cover De'Ami Brown when he stepped in and replaced Tariq Bracy last year. He had to cover Josh Downs this year, Devontae Smith, John Mechie. Yeah. I mean, he's had to cover some dudes during his tenure. And, Alex Pierce is a guy that I know you like a lot that he had to check. So he was locked on David Bell at times this year. So Clarence Lewis is a solid football player. It's just the bar has been raised for Notre Dame as a team. And I think he's one of those guys as a boundary corner. And that's the thing. I still haven't gotten an explanation on why they flipped those two. Because I feel like as a field corner, Clarence is better protected. So if you're going to have him a corner, I'd like him more as a field guy. And I don't know why they made that move. I have no clue. I'm sure there's a good reason for it. I just don't know what that reason is. So I'm going to, so I think that hurt Clarence more than it helped, than it helped him. We'll find out, if that's going to continue. But he's a kid that can bring some value. I just wish they could find a position that better suits his strengths. And so that way it's harder to exploit his weaknesses, because you just don't want him flipping his hips and open. You don't want to. If they were still playing Bob Diaco's defense, I'd love Clarence Lewis at corner, because it's cover two, it's rerouting, it's sitting under zones, it's stuff like that. He could play that really well. Nobody really plays cover two full time really anymore, in my opinion.
You can't really.
No, you can't.
You just can't.
You can't. Yeah. If you're playing Wisconsin, maybe, but like for the most part, cover two's like now like a change up coverage. You throw it out there to confuse somebody. Like, wait a minute, what's this cover two stuff, right? You may play cover two to the boundary, but you're going to play it in a combo coverage where you're going four to the field or man to the field or something like that. So, I think the only really two I see a lot of this now, Ryan, and it's two that I like, actually. I still think there's a ton of value to two man. If you have corners that can lock up and really run, I still find a lot of value to two man, just not cover two as a zone because of the way that teams play now. But that's the reality that Clarence Lewis finds himself in. So as a corner, I really feel like he is going to be limited. I think if they were ever able to get to the point where they could put him at safety, I think that'd be the best thing for him, and that'd be the best thing for the defense as a whole.
Yeah, no, I agree completely, because I just think there's there's some limitations to even what you can do on the back end. Like you said, it's like, nobody's running true like Tampa cover two as much, right? They're not running cover four. Like everything's, if they're running anything close to that understanding, it's some type of match coverage, right? Where like the situations are going to dictate, go into man in the middle of reps, which just, that's just kind of how the game's moving. So I agree. I think that Clarence, there's ways to maximize what Clarence does well. And I just think that inside potentially would be a lot more of a strength for him. Especially playing maybe in a little, because even to the field, to your point, right? Like I guess the fundamental understanding would be like Cam Hart's probably our best athlete at corner, at least of the starters, right? So we're going to put him to the field, which I guess in theory makes sense. But with extra help to the field, I feel like Clarence could be a better player in that situation comparative to getting in some one-on-one situations to the boundary. But I do think that Clarence Lewis, and I want this to be the biggest point that I'm going to make, is that I think Clarence Lewis can be an asset to a defense. Have not been the biggest fan of how they have used that asset. Like I feel like that asset could be of a bigger impact in a different role.
I agree with you on that. Let's get to some more here. Here's one from John A1. Which group needs the most physical development this spring? Earlier we talked about which group needs to improve the most. I went with corner. Which group needs to develop the most physical development this spring? That's a really good question, John. I would probably have to go with linebacker on that one.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I was actually going to say that because I was thinking obviously Maris is coming back from the injury. You've had a bunch of young guys, obviously Bertrand going into now his second year of increased playing time, obviously potentially, and then you have all the young guns that enrolled early, right? That fantastic group. So I think that where you're really young at that unit, there's a lot of promise in that unit, but there's either coming back from injury, limited experience, or no experience at all in that unit. So I feel like physical development is going to be huge for linebackers.
And I think Jack Kaiser's another guy that just needs to continue to get stronger.
Yeah.
That's going to be a big one for me. Questions are rolling in now. Finally, this is good stuff. They spent like a half an hour just talking about the fact I'm not wearing a hat today. I told you that when
someone
we
made a comment on there. Yeah.
There were several. And I told you before the show that it was going to get discussed a lot, but just didn't feel like wearing a hat today. M. Kostra, will the bus have any involvement with the running back room apart from pure star power? I don't think so. No.
Involvement in what? I guess involvement in what way?
So, I think they're thinking like he's going to be like what he's going to be is going to be a mentor and kind of that big name. And I'm going to tell you something right now. I love the fact that Dylan McCullough has embraced Jerome Bettis being on campus this offseason.
Yeah.
He could have gotten real territorial, like, hey, this is my group, and you know what I mean? And that's partly why I don't think you can bring him back as a coach, even if you wanted to. I'd be like, look, if you wanted if Jerome Bettis wanted to get into coaching full time, I'd talk about it. But if it's just, hey, while I'm here, I'll help out, no, I wouldn't do that. Because Coach McCullough needs to establish himself. He's the guy you got to listen to. But he has wisely embraced, like, I got a Hall of Fame running back on campus every day taking classes. Who played here, was an All-American, was an All-American caliber player here, played under the last legendary coach Notre Dame had, because you have to win a title to be a legend, in my opinion. Longevity doesn't equal legendary. And so I look at it and say, boy, you really hope you can find a way to take advantage of that. And he has. I mean, there's the picture where it's him and Jerome Bettis. There was the picture on Twitter that people are talking about where it was taken while they were at Ruth's Chris and Jerome Bettis is there. You know what I mean? So it's like, man, you've got to take advantage of that. And, I think, and then as a mentor to some of these young guys, I think having a guy like Jerome Bettis around and maybe take Logan Diggs under his wing if he's struggling, about being away from home, or if Audric Estime's, maybe unhappy about certain things or struggling to be away from home, or Chris Tyree's not liking those aren't issues. I'm just throwing stuff out, right? Whatever happens to young kids. Having a guy like that's not your coach, that's been through it, I think is big.
Yeah. And I think you need to utilize even more than that, right? Like, I mean, it's obviously Jerome Bettis is the easy one because he's a senior student now, but when Quentin Nelson wants to come back on campus, hey man, let's come meet with the team. When Michael Floyd wants to come back, like whoever it is, the stars that people know, come back and, I don't even like, not obviously in an expanded role, but like come here and talk to the team, show your face. We welcome you back. Be welcoming to what has made you great in spurts, but I think that you need to use that to your advantage because I think it's huge.
Yeah. And there was another question about this that I want to find as well that I thought I kind of want to address, because here it is from Adam Ziliak. Do you see more former players coming back to speak with the team like Jerome Bettis did the other day? Now, let's keep in mind it's much easier for them to get Jerome Bettis on campus to speak because Jerome now lives in South Bend for the time being because he's going to school at Notre Dame. But this is something Marcus Freeman's been pushing for from the minute he got here. This is what that State of the Union was all about. It was, hey, you guys built this tradition. I'm benefiting off of what you built. You got to be a part of this. And Coach Freeman, before that video was turned into private, he made a comment that was like, the tradition can't just be about what we tell the players. It can't be like this fictitious thing they can't talk to or touch or whatever. It's you guys. You are the tradition. And if the Golden Dome was what it is and Notre Dame was nothing but a mediocre football team for 70 years, nobody really talks about the Golden Dome the way that they do now, right? Touchdown Jesus is just kind of like a cool, fun thing, but it's not that big of a deal, right? Newt Rockney's not Newt Rockney because of the Golden Dome. He's Newt Rockney because he was a revolutionary football coach, right? It's the people. It's Lou Holtz. It's his players. It's Joe Montana's. It's going all the way back, Alan Page. I mean, Notre Dame was producing All-Americans that went on to win NFL MVPs and then become members of the Minnesota Supreme Court, right? Like that's the tradition of Notre Dame. And Marcus Freeman gets that. And he also doesn't have, like, Marcus Freeman has an ego like any other good football coach. And an ego is simply your own confidence in yourself and your ability to do a job. That's ego. That's a healthy ego. Unhealthy ego is when I can be the only face of the program. Like, I don't know, other coaches that maybe coached Notre Dame for 12 years. Marcus Freeman understands that, like, I don't define Notre Dame. I'm a part of Notre Dame. Jerome Bettis is a bigger part of Notre Dame than I am. Lou Holtz is a bigger part of Notre Dame than I am right now. And I want you guys around. So for him to get on the Zoom call with legends and say, hey, we need you guys here. You know, and talking to Sean Davis earlier today, he was talking about talking to a former player and how that guy was like, I don't have to worry about buying a ticket now to a game because I could be on the sideline where the recruits can see me. Like the fact that they have to say that is absurd to me. Like a former player, a former captain has to be concerned about whether or not he can get a ticket to a game is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. Marcus Freeman's trying to change that. So, yes, we're going to see a lot more of that. We're going to see a lot more of that around the program. I mean, Marcus Freeman the other day taking a picture and basically matching clothes. I don't think it was on purpose. It was just, khakis and a navy blue shirt with Lou Holtz and tweeting it out as like appraising, like, this is the guy. Some of that is for show, but doing something for show is okay if you actually believe what you're saying. And so even though Marcus Freeman and the staff are doing things, you're tweeting the Jerome Bettis thing out. You're tweeting that out for effect, but you have him there to speak because it has a legitimate impact on your football team. It can be both. You can do something that is a sort of it's a prop, but it also has value, and that's what they're doing. And I love the fact he's doing that. It's just another example of he has embraced Notre Dame in a way that the last head coach just never did. And I think it's going to benefit the program a great deal because of it.
Yeah. No, and I mean, just to that note, the recruiting land has changed, obviously, right? Like everything has changed. Social media is a huge thing, and it is. And then being able to show that video of Jerome Bettis, like you said, it's not necessarily that moment didn't happen because they wanted this great Twitter video to go viral, right? Like that was a moment for the players of the football team. But then also it has a continued effect on the recruiting landscape, on supporters of the program, of everybody that's seeing this video on Twitter. And you have to use that to your advantage, man. Like you have to. There's the glitz and glam now of recruiting and just of selling your program just in general. So you have to use those things. So if something can serve a multiple purpose, you got to use it.
Mm-hmm. More questions from Brian Crawdaddy. Love this name, by the way. Some of you and your names are so creative. I love it. How long will it take? This is a very good question, though. How long will it take to turn around the offensive line? I feel like our line has a long way to go in order to be elite. I addressed this the other day. I'll say it again, Ryan, depending on what you say. You may say what I'm going to say, and then I don't need to repeat it. So since I already spoke on this the other day, I want to give you a first crack at addressing this. How long will it take to turn around the offensive line? And do you feel like the line has a long way to go in order to be elite?
So how long would it to turn it around? I mean, the moment they play in another game, I think it's going to be drastically improved because you're going to have a whole offseason.
Then let's say this, since the second part of the question was about being elite, let's say how long do you think it will take for Notre Dame to have one of the 5 to 6 best offensive lines in college football? I think that's it.
Yeah. No, I think it could happen by mid-season, by the end of the season. I think that's very possible because I think that you have 2 rising sophomores, for at offensive tackle, which is going to be paramount. You have a center that is projected to potentially be a first or second round pick next year that has played going into his 4th year as a starter. You have Andrew Kristofic, who is coming back for his 2nd year as a starter. You have a lot of experience coming back. I mean, some of them are still younger guys, but you still have guys that have played a lot of football. And there's a lot of talent, and coaching, I think, has just been kind of the missing element to a degree for sure. So I think a full offseason and then, half the season to mesh. And then I think that you're rolling the second half of the year. I think that it could be potentially one of the best offensive lines in college football by the end of the season, because I think that there's talent. It's not like you have to replenish the talent in the room. The talent is there. It's just been about development. And I think that development can happen very quickly, to be honest.
I said the other day in a show, Ryan, that I thought that we should start to definitely see a big change. If it's not by the 3rd game, I'm going to be disappointed. I don't expect them to look like the 2017 O-line in the opener or at any point in time in the first 3 or 4 games. But by the 3rd game, we should see yep, this group is definitely better. It could be by the 1st game. I think to say 5 or 6 best lines, I think middle of the season, I think it was a good time frame. So I agree with you on that. But yes, I don't think they have a long way to go in order to be elite. And that's what was so frustrating, Brian, is because the talent was better than it was. There were 3 things happening last year specifically. Number one, the unit didn't have the right mindset. And that was an issue for a while. It just wasn't a physical, just get after it group. Number 2, they were poorly coached. They don't play with good footwork, and they don't play with good hand play. That can be fixed in an off season. It just can. And then, number 3, I don't think they had guys playing at the right spots. And I mean, you throw Michael Carmody out at left tackle, guess what? He's not going to be successful. It's just not. He's not a left tackle. Does that mean that Michael Carmody can't play? Definitely doesn't mean that, because I think he can play. I mean, there were certain not being more willing to move, Jarrett Patterson out to tackle. Right. With Lugg, and Zeke Correll at center, where Zeke was more comfortable, and then moving Lugg inside the guard. All of a sudden, you put Patterson out at right tackle, Blake Fisher at left tackle, Zeke Correll at center with Josh Lugg, and then the battle at the other guard spot between Kane Madden and Rocco and Kristofic and all of them. That's a much better line.
Yeah.
But they were unwilling to do that, even though, from what I'm told, Jarrett Patterson wanted to move. He had been convinced. At first, he was I got the good thing going here at center. Then when it was kind of told to him, hey, look, here's it's going to impact you NFL draft-wise. Ryan, okay, I'll kind of ask you this. If Jarrett Patterson moves out the right tackle this year and plays the way I think you and I think he would have played the tackle, what does that do to his draft value?
Well, I mean, I think it gives it obviously the ability to play multiple positions, or at least back up multiple positions, is paramount at the next level, right? First and foremost. I also think offensive tackle, we talked about this before. You are on an island there, so your traits are well more on display, right? So sometimes at center, it can be a little difficult to evaluate because you're getting so much help on both sides of you, and sometimes in pass protection, you might be one-on-one a handful of times a game. So being able to see the traits, I think, would help big time, and then also just being able to play multiple positions is big time as well. So it can help tremendously. And I'll say this, Brian, how many teams in college football right now would want Jarrett Patterson as their center to start with? How many would want him? And then think about how many other college football teams would trade out their offensive tackle situation for having Joel and Blake Fisher, and how many would want an Andrew Kristofic? Talent is not the issue. And
Josh Lugg may not start for Notre Dame this year. There's a chance. No, I think he will, but there's a chance he won't. Zeke Correll's not going to probably be a starter for Notre Dame this year, right? Rocco Spindler's may not be a starter. And if he is starting, it means Andrew Kristofic's not starting. There are the talent's not an issue. And the only people that thought talent was an issue, well, the only person was Brian Kelly. I mean, I genuinely think he convinced himself of that because he couldn't accept the fact that I screwed up, right? But no, to your point, Brian, I would say, Brian, I think where you're coming from is you're assuming that the level of play last year equals the talent level. And if you're assuming that, then I understand and I'm sympathetic to you thinking they got a long way to go. I just don't accept the premise that what we saw last year was indicative of the talent level as much as it was indicative of the coaching and the decision makings from a coaching standpoint. I think that had a lot more to say with it because otherwise it's like, I had this conversation this summer with somebody, we were talking about LSU and the changes that happen. And, somebody made the point that, well, it makes sense that LSU was able to do that because they had a number 1 overall pick at quarterback and 3 first-round picks at receiver and a first-round pick at running back. And I said, yeah, but who thought any of those guys there's one guy that people thought was a first-round caliber talent going into 2019, and it was Jamar Chase. That was the only guy because he was younger. Nobody looked at Joe Burrow and said, that guy is going to be a record-setting quarterback and he's going to be playing in the Super Bowl in 3 years. Nobody thought that. Joe Burrow didn't think that. You know what I mean? But it required them to start putting guys in position to where their talent could carry the day. Like the 2018 LSU offense with the same exact players they had in 2019 averaged fewer points per game than Notre Dame did in 2020. Fewer yards per play than Notre Dame did in 2020. Think about that. So your production doesn't always equal your talent level if you're not being put in position to be successful. And as Ryan and I have both stated, I think the issue, however, was not talent. It was, were they putting the right players on the field at the right spots? That was a bigger question to me.
Yes.
And then not being coached correctly, I think were bigger issues. So I think, Ryan, I think you're absolutely right that people are going to be a little surprised. Non-offensive line people are going to be a little surprised by the talent level that Notre Dame is going to possess. And Joe Alt and Blake Fisher are going to make bigger jumps because of their experiences this year, especially Joe Alt. And Blake Fisher is going to get him from a technical standpoint because he wasn't coached. He was coached pretty well for a high school kid. I think Blake didn't come in here as like some raw kid that knows what he was doing, but he wasn't coached like Joe Alt was coached because whose dad played in the NFL, right? Yeah. Joe's going to make the big jump because of Matt Bayless.
Yes.
Right? And then Blake's going to make the big jump because of Harry Heastand and Matt Bayless. And so Rocco, I think, is going to make a big jump. So I'm excited to see what this group can do because I actually think this is going to be a really effective offensive line, which has me kind of fired up about a lot of other things. Got a UIW swimmer, Brian and Vince. Any new workout warrior rumors this winter? Freshmen getting caught up, etc. Honestly, I haven't asked a ton about this just because I don't care, and I need to do a better job of asking about it because I know that y'all care, and so that's on me because as a football coach, I've seen the workout warriors when the pads come on and it's about playing football, like kind of disappear, So I don't ask about it. I should do a better job because I know y'all care about it. So when I say I don't care, it's not that you shouldn't care. It's just I have a different perspective on it. So, but I have had a couple conversations with some people, and I'll just share a couple things that I've heard, trying to think of some of the different positions. I've heard that the freshman linebackers have really impressed people, and Josh Burnham and Nolan Ziegler are the two that have really stood out as far as what they're doing in the weight room, that they've really stood out. Another linebacker that I've heard is having a great offseason in the weight room and conditioning stuff is Prince Colley. I've heard he's having a phenomenal offseason right now. Just, I'm looking at something somebody sent me the other day. Let me just kind of pull this up here real quick. I got from a buddy of mine that sent me some results of some different things, but just want to refresh my memory here. But yeah, I'm looking at these things, and yeah, Prince Colley is just really, really blowing up. Chris Tyree is from some of the numbers I've been given is really throwing around some weight in the weight room this year. And he's really kind of adding some strength to what he does. So, there's some guys at those positions. I've heard Jaden Mickey's really impressed people. I've heard a lot of the freshmen have really impressed people with their willingness to come in and compete. Like they don't get in the weight room backing down. Obviously you're always going to have guys that are homesick or whatever, but like, who cares? That always happens. But I've heard as a group, for the most part, this group really gets after it and really competes, and is really impressing some people. So that's a good sign, certainly good sign. But Prince Collie is definitely a guy that I have heard a lot of good things about as far as what he's doing. And I've heard Houston Griffith is working like he's never worked before. So again, will that translate on the football field? No idea. But this workout warrior, I think that pretty much describes what I've heard from Houston Griffith quite a bit. So, and then there's a lot of guys that are banged up, that are kind of coming back from off-season surgeries and injuries and stuff like that. So that's part of it too. These are always fun questions from Brent Byers. Ryan, I'll let you touch on this one first. Give us your educated guess. I love these questions are great. Like when we haven't even gotten to spring, we don't even know who's going to be in the starting lineup. We don't know any, but for fun, we'll do it anyway. Give us your educated guess on the offensive output this year: points per game, yards per game, and what do you think Buckner's final stat line ends up, both rushing and passing? 6,071 TDs is an acceptable response.
I think we would all love that. I think we talked about this on one show. I think I said 2,800 passing yards to 3K passing, somewhere in that ballpark. And I think I said 25 to 27 touchdown passes and 600 plus rushing and another 8 to 10 touchdowns.
Mm-hmm. So basically 3,435 about the baseline of 3,400 total yards and 35 total touchdowns is about a good season where you could see him.
We'll say that. We'll say somewhere in that ballpark, maybe 3,600. Mm-hmm. Yeah, somewhere in that ballpark, I'd say. Points per game, say 38 points per game. Getting closer to that 40 mark, which I know is a number that we would definitely like to see Notre Dame get to at some points. Yards per game, that one's a little tougher. I'll say they average a little jump in running this year. I'll say it's 150 rushing yards a game. And
you think they're only going to average 150 rushing yards per game is what you're saying? Or you're saying that's what it was last year?
I'm saying that was about what it was last year, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll say if we take a bump there, I'm just trying to go through it in my head. I'll say it's about 170 on the ground and about 270 in the air.
Okay.
Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
170, 270?
Yep. So 270 as a team would get Notre Dame to about 3,500 passing yards. So you're looking at Buckner being a little above where I think 260 is a little bit more of a 60. 250 to 260 is more of a reasonable number for passing, because the reality is there's going to be some games, Ryan, where they're not going to throw for a ton because they just run over people. Because I think you get to 260 a game, that's a little under 3,400 yards a game. That fits more into Buckner's about 28, 29, and then the second quarterback coming off the bench, and different times is going to throw some passes and some mop-up games and get about 400 yards passing. I think that's a reasonable number. And then I think 200 rushing yards is the goal. So 260 to 200, maybe 250 to 210, some sort of sliding scale in there to get you to about 460 is sort of my minimum objective this year. And for context purposes, 460 would have put Notre Dame number 16 in the nation last year in total offense. And some of the teams ahead of them were Fresno, SMU, Western Michigan, Kent State, Coastal Carolina, and Western Kentucky, meaning that's 6 non-Power 5 teams. That means 460 would have put them amongst the top 10 Power 5 teams last year. That's about the number to me that'll get you to around 38 to 39 points a game. The thing for me that I care more about, Ryan, and here's where I think we could see a big jump, is I think an even bigger jump for Notre Dame isn't going to actually be in I don't care as much about yards. I want to see a big jump in yards per play. I want to see them get back into the top 10 in yards per play. Because there's a scenario in which your yards don't take a big jump because your defense and your special teams are creating more short fields and or points, right? And so I've used this analogy before, Ryan. There was a year when I was coaching at Muhlenberg. I know it's a school you're familiar with, we averaged 44 points per game in the regular season. We only averaged about 350, 360 yards per game. I mean, 350 yards per game should have you like bottom half of the country in points. The reason we had a pretty good yards per play average, but our average starting field position was the 48-yard line. We had 5 maybe special teams touchdowns that year, right? So when you only have to go 50 yards to score, your yard numbers aren't going to look great, but your points will. I think the best way to evaluate, to me, truly an offense, if I can only pick one number, I'm going with yards per play as opposed to total yards. And to me, that's a much better number. And the example that I'll use is, if you look at yards per game this year and you look at like Alabama, for example, Alabama was at 488 yards per game this year. Last year, they were at 540, right? That's a 60-yard, that's a pretty decent gap. The more troubling number for me for Alabama, why I didn't think their offense was as good this year, is Alabama this year averaged 6.5 yards per play. Last year, they were at 7.8. That was the bigger issue, because what that tells me, Ryan, is that 60-yard per game difference, you had to have some volume in there. And if you look at the number of plays that Alabama ran, they ran a lot more plays, which tells me they were a lot less efficient offensively. I care more about Notre Dame seeing a big jump in yards per play. So I want to see them get above 6.5. I want to see them get to like 6.7, 6.8, 6.9. The best in program history is the 7.0 from 2015. I'd like to see close to that. I think that, to me, is a better gauge of what the points are going to be than total yards, because of the other factors that go into your yardage total. So last year they were at 6.1, which is not a good number. That's a very average, like you're just a solid offense at that point in time. And when you consider how good the offense was at yards per play down the stretch, it puts some context into that 6.1, because starting from USC on, they were at 7.1, 8.8, 9.3. Oh, I'm sorry, that's passing yards. So let me go to total offense, because that would have been a completely different story. Down the stretch from North Carolina on, they were at 7.7, 7.1, 6.9, 8.7, 7.2, and 6.2 in the bowl game. Now, the 6.2 in the bowl game is a really impressive number when you consider the defense they were going against was Oklahoma State, which came into that game, I believe, ranked in the top 5 last year in yards per play. They ended up at 4.58. That's after giving up 6.2 against Notre Dame. So to me, think about those numbers, Ryan. Their lowest yards per game attempt of 6.2 in the bowl game, but in the final 5 games of the regular season, their lowest yards per game was 6.9 against Virginia. That puts them in the top 10 nationally last year in yards per play. That would have put them around 10th, right? That was their worst game. So that's the number that shows me that the offense is getting better, is going to be that number. That's what I care more about.
Efficient and explosive. I hear you. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. And that's what I wrote in an article about this yesterday. I would encourage you to check it out. It was about the identity that Notre Dame needs to establish on offense. And I talk about the fact that, you see the teams that a lot of the teams that are like way high in the top 10 in yards are the sort of the air raid teams, the spread teams that are about running 1 million plays, right? Mm-hmm. What I care more about is how are you yards per play wise? And that's what made last year's Alabama team so good. And that's what made LSU's offense so good in 2019. I mean, LSU's offense in 2019 averaged 7.9 yards per play. I mean, that's an insane number. LSU only ran 1,080 plays that year, which may sound like a lot, but they did that in 15 games. Like, that's not a lot of plays per game. It's really not. When you consider, like, some other teams that year that were getting to 1,000. I mean, UCF that year had 1,060 in 13 games, right? I mean, to get to that in 15 games, that's not a ton of plays. No. What that tells me is you're super efficient. And they were super. Efficiency to me is the big thing, and also, efficiency. I think efficiency leads to big plays. The problem that I had with the 2017 offense, for example, the 2017 offense, Ryan, for Notre Dame, set a school record. I think it's a modern day school record of yards per rush. They averaged 6.3 yards per carry.
It's pretty good
that year. That's like a top 3 statistic, best in modern history. So modern history at Notre Dame refers to World War II on. Think about that. Best rushing attack, like yards per play, but that was a very inefficient offense, like as a whole. Offensively that year, they only averaged 6.4 yards per play. Like if you're at 6.2, if they're at 6.2 yards per carry this year, they're going to be close to 8 in overall yards per play, right?
Yep.
So to me, I care more about the efficiency of it than I do about the point was the reason they were at 6.2 in 2017 was they had a ton of big plays, right? 25 runs of at least 20 yards that year. They had over 10 runs of at least 50 yards that year. They were an inefficient running game because of Josh Adams wasn't just hey, get 2. We just need you to get 2. Dexter Williams averaged over 9 yards a carry that year, right? I want to see the efficiency because I think efficiency will lead to explosiveness, which leads to a ton of points. Explosiveness without efficiency is going to be exactly what Notre Dame was in 2017, which is there were some numbers in 2017 that were insane. But overall points per game, 34 points a game. That's it.
Yeah.
Right? And to me, you need both, I believe. Brent Byers, another question. You guys are going to have a major recruiting event this season, one where everyone can get together before the game and drink a beer or soda if that's not your thing. We plan on – so, Brent, we're going to probably tailgate before the Blue Gold game, and we're going to tailgate before every home game next year. Now, not every tailgate will be about food. What we got from people, feedback from a lot of people was, hey, look, I don't care. Because my thought was, I don't want to tailgate if I'm not like big spread and doing like, I just feel like, they're like, hey, we don't care about that. We just want to get together. We want to meet people. We want to kind of hang out with the IB crew. If you just provide drinks and whatever. So we'll do that. We'll have some food at some events, but some of them, like, if we don't bring a big spread for the Cal or Marshall game, we'll still be there in the parking lot meeting and doing things. So yeah. We won't ever provide alcohol at Irish Breakdown, but if you have some, you're welcome to bring that. So we're not like anti-alcohol. We're just not going to provide alcohol, which Vince and I have explained in the past why that is. But we'll definitely be doing that this year, Brent. I wanted to answer that. So Ryan, we kicked the show off with somebody asked, what does it mean to close? Like when we talk about closing on recruits, what does that mean? So we explained it. So Felix Fournier's response. So I wanted the context for why this. Yeah. Felix says, I thought closing on a recruit meant making weird, almost suggestive dancing videos with him and then putting those on Twitter.
Well, the one LSU didn't close on though, that they did that. So, I mean, if that's your thing, man, whatever. But if you're gonna make a fool out of yourself, you should at least make sure you closed on the
at least land them
out there. Yeah,
you're gonna grind on a teenage boy. You should at least get him to sign.
At least,
what I mean? Yeah. So inappropriate. Yep. Brent Byers also says, what are the 3 to 4 intangibles you guys think? Ryan, I want you to touch on this one.
Yep.
What are the 3-4 intangibles, top 3-4 intangibles you guys think have the most impact on the program? Recruiting, new alumni, player interactions, practice competitiveness, better coaching, team identity, etc.
It's a great question. I think for Notre Dame specifically, I would say, the recruiting dynamic we've talked about a ton, right? Like Coach Freeman has already kind of taken an initiative to kind of change some stereotypes when it comes to recruiting at Notre Dame. So I would say recruiting impact for sure. I would say the alumni side of thing is huge, right? Like it's been a long time since Notre Dame has been what most people conceive as Notre Dame, right? Like since 1988, this is the last championship, and everybody knows that. So bringing back alumni that have experienced that type of success to not only rub off on the team, but also just get, to make sure that the program is coming full circle, I think is paramount. And then competitiveness. And I know it's just practice competitiveness, Brett, is what you said, but I think it's competitiveness all the way around, whether that is in practice, in the weight room, in the classroom, during the games. I think that is the biggest thing. That I want you to be competitive and compete at everything you do, be the best version of yourself. So recruiting impact, be it having alumni a part of the program, coming full circle, and then the competitiveness as a person would be my three biggest things.
I think the last thing to me is important. You have to have an identity as a program. And that's what I wrote yesterday. So look, a lot of people think identity is, okay, we got to run the football. We got to be – no, that's not identity. That's scheme. Identity to me is not determined by what plays you run. What plays you run is determined by your identity. It's the other way around. I think identity has to be important. I think creating an identity – I never felt like offensively especially the last 10, 12 years that Notre Dame really ever had much of an idea. It was always like they were like grab bagging all the time, right? And then you're trying to run these pro-style schemes, but you're not focusing on fundamentals. You're not teaching guys how to run routes and all. It just there was no identity there. I think that's going to change under Tommy Rees. I really do. I think we're going to see him. I mean, I don't think you hire Harry Hiestand. You don't push to hire Harry Hiestand if you only care about scheme. Because Harry Hiestand cares about scheme to the degree that he has to care about scheme, because you have to call something, right? Like this technique is leading towards something, but he's always been a technique leads to success and scheme success, right? And I don't think you bring in Dylan McCullough if you're just care about the scheme. Like I don't think you bring in Chancey Stuckey if you care about if it was all about scheme. I think he would have brought in Jamarcus Shepard because he would have brought in a lot of scheme. He's looking for guys that can teach kids how to play the game, and that's something that's been missing so dramatically from the offense in recent years. And that's an identity, right? Because the identity is we're going to be sound. We're going to be, we're going to focus on. I think they're looking for precision over volume from a like instead of being like an air raid run 90 plays, it's like we may only run 65 plays or 60 plays, but we're going to average 7+ yards per play because we're going to be a super efficient, explosive team. That's the identity is we're going to be a perfect team, right? Like an air raid team, you don't talk about perfection a lot. It's like just go, hey, get up, run the next play. You got to go. It's about volume. It's about tempo. It's about catching a team off guard. A team like an Alabama with Sark, a team like you look at Sean McVay in the NFL and West Coast guys. It's about. Bill Walsh had the West Coast down to an exact science. It was you're going to this depth or this foot and you're breaking it this route, and it was like an art form. And I think that is kind of more of what we're going to see from Tommy Rees is we're going to be about precision. We're going to be about the scheme is going to be strong, but what's behind the scheme is great technique up front, toughness, physicality, knowing how to run a route, having great spacing, all the things that great coaching requires that's sort of not dependent upon scheme. So I think an identity is important. I think competitiveness is, that's the thing I loved and respected the most from the USC era is people like, man, by the time we got to Saturday, that was the easy part. That's something that we would hear from players that played under Lou Holtz. Like Saturday was the easiest part of being a player at Notre Dame. Just because if you could make plays on against Aaron Taylor in practice, then you knew you were going to be able to make plays against whatever offensive line you were going against on Saturday that week. And I think that was a lot of times missing from what Notre Dame has done. And I think that's something that we know that Marcus Freeman is going to bring back. And obviously, healthy recruiting has got to be a part of that, right? You got to be strong recruiters. And I think the other factor to me is, I do think that that a strong alumni base can be extremely important to a football program. So I think Brent got to a lot of the things that I think are very important parts of being a top, the intangibles that go into being a top. And then the other one I would say is, you have to have a great off-the-field program. Your nutrition has to be top-notch in today's era. Your strength and conditioning program has to be elite. All those type of things. People forget the guy. I believe I'm actually going to have to check this out, but I believe the guy still running Alabama's strength and conditioning team is still a guy that they took from. Basically, he kind of got his start under Matt Bayless. David Ballou, is he still their strength coach at Alabama? Do you know?
I believe so. Yeah, I don't think there was a change.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. Director of Sports Performance, David Ballou. He was a guy that got his start in college sports under Matt Bayless. So I think that's partly why I'm so excited about the line. Yeah. Ryan, is because I think of Harry Hiestand got to work with Matt Balis once. Right. That was a pretty good group. You know what I mean? And it's going to be fun to see what he's going to be able to do over a period of time with with being able to work with Matt Balis on a yearly basis. So I love the question, Brent, and I love the thoughts that you had.
It's a great question.
Yin's Irish. So we have a Pittsburgh native in the show, it would appear, Ryan. Yin's Irish. The narrative seems to be get Dante, and Carnell comes too. Are they a package deal? If not, why the confidence in that scenario playing out, and why would Vizina not have the same impact on Cardell?
Yeah, I mean, we covered it. We've covered this in the past. Quite simply, Carnell is well aware of who Dante Moore is, and he's a fantastic. And Carnell is not the only wide receiver that it would have an impact on if Dante Moore did land with Notre Dame. Now they have obviously a relationship. They have confidence in one another. They think highly of each other, obviously. So the impact of getting Carnell Tate would be very much increased if Dante Moore did come on board. So it is not a package deal, because we've talked about this. If Dante Moore chose to go to Michigan State or down to Miami, that does not necessarily mean that Carnell Tate is going to go to any of those programs. But in this instance with Notre Dame, it is a big bump potentially in the Carnell Tate recruitment. So it is not a package deal. Would Vizina? I do think that Christopher Vizina would have an impact on wide receivers as well, though. We talked about this during the show, but it would not be to the degree. Yes, not Carnell.
Not necessarily Carnell, right?
Right. So if you get a caliber of quarterback to the degree of a Christopher Vizina, it would increase wide receiver recruitment, obviously. But the point is that it would not increase as much potentially as Dante. And in regards to Carnell Tate, it would not move the needle not nearly as much as Dante Moore would.
Agree. Good stuff. Papa Bear, are you in favor of joint college practices? Like Notre Dame and Purdue, for example, sharing the practice field prior to the first game. I've talked about this recently.
Yeah. I have no issue with it. If they're not playing during the season, I have no issue with it. No.
The only problem would be there are certain parts of the country where it'd be hard to find a partner at the Division I level. For Notre Dame, it'd be easy. You got Indiana, you've got Michigan State, you've got Michigan, you've got Purdue, you've got Illinois, Northwestern. There'd be plenty of options. Washington and Washington State don't have as many options. That would have to be a thing where, maybe like, okay, Washington and Eastern Washington, or Washington pays to have Montana come out for a couple days. I think, but that starts getting expensive, right? I mean, your housing, so I think there'd be some financial burdens that would have to overcome, but I think it'd be good for players. I think the only other concern I have is you've got to really make sure that you're properly mentally handling this situation with your team, because what we've seen in the NFL is we tend to see a lot of skirmishes, which I don't care as much about as long as they're just pushing and shoving. But in today's era of the cameras on everything, it's like some of the things, like I hear people talk. I don't watch the NBA, Ryan, but I'll see something happen on the court and people are like losing their minds. Like, oh my God, it's the worst thing. I'm like, I grew up in the 80s watching basketball. This is nothing. I watched Dr. J try to choke Larry Bird out, and Larry Bird's throwing blows at Dr. J, right? Like, I mean, I've seen blood get drawn with punches. I remember watching Robert Parrish walk up and just knock Bill Laimbeer out. I mean, like, I don't care about that. Like, we're overreacting, but now that everything's on camp, some of those things that happened, in the NBA back then, they weren't televised, you know what I mean? But like now we're so, I don't want to say we've gotten soft. It's just, we're so much more
concerned,
overreacting, I think, as we turn things that are like it's like this. What Juwan Howard did with the Wisconsin coach was wrong.
Sure.
It needs to be dealt with. We can all acknowledge it. But then it's like, let's just get rid of handshakes altogether. It's like, what? Like, what? Hold on a second, right? Like, we just overreact to everything now, as opposed to, hey, this kid had a heat of the moment. Like, who hasn't been in a fight on the basketball court? You know what I mean? It's just
on a field in general, right?
Right. Right. It just happens to be in a situation where it's on TV and and we overreact to everything now. It's like everything's a dramatic. No, the kid overreacted. Jawan Howard acted like an idiot. Okay, suspend him and then don't do it again. And then let's can we move on and not turn this into we need to rethink sportsmanship. And no, Jawan Howard did something. There was another game where then deal with those coaches. But think about how many handshakes happened in college basketball this year. How many times have there been issues?
I know. It's like 99% of handshakes have no issues, but the one time it happens,
we got to turn it into, that's the norm. It's just absurd.
Right.
So what would happen is there'd be 80 joint practices, because some of them would be like FCS teams or whatever, and there'd be 5 things get caught on camera and be like, oh, can't do this anymore. It's dangerous. Kids punch another kid's helmets. Yeah, I'm really concerned about that. That's definitely something we got to make sure we don't do in America. All the things going on in our country, that's the thing we got to worry about, right? We're not handling handshakes right. Okay. But that to me would make it difficult to do practically. So I would say, hey, look, there is a media blackout. When you're having one-on-one, when you're having practice with Purdue, Notre Dame, as much as I would love to be there as a member of the media, nope, no. Don't do it. Just, you both sign NDAs, right? We're not releasing practice film. There's no we're turning our our social media cameras off, right? We'll take some still shots just to kind of play it up and things like that. And you may put some clips out, but none of the stuff that could get leaked out of the brawl that happened between the offensive linemen that happens at that would have happened between the teams themselves if they weren't going against each other. Would have happened on their own. Hey, it happens in fall camp, right?
Ryan, that reminds me of so for everybody that doesn't know, I live right outside of Philadelphia, so I'm listening to Philly sports talk radio right when I'm driving somewhere or whatever. And there's this one Eagles reporter who every single day last year, because I think the Eagles had 4 or 5 joint practices last year, and he reported after every one and was like, "Oh, Eagles won that day. They're 4-0 in joint practices." I'm like, why is that something we're covering or talking about? That is
it's just it's the nature of 24-hour sports and 24-hour channels. We've got to have something to write about and talk about. So let's just take something that nobody really cares about and turn it into something. And then you do that long enough, and then people start being more sensitive to those things, and it drives me a little bit crazy. But it is what it is. But I would love to see joint practices, kind of right in the middle of fall camp, maybe the 10 days before your first game. 10 to 13 days for your first game. You just have a stretch of 2 or 3 days where make a rule. Team has to kind of come within a certain vicinity, or you have to apply for a waiver. I don't want Oklahoma flying down to Florida State. I mean, let's be reasonable.
Make it like the pro day thing, right? You could travel 50 square miles. Or
that's a good way of looking at it. Yeah, the pro day thing. Look, you can do an FCS team, right, if you want. I mean, I don't. It's not so much that you're. I had to face Bama. We're bet. No, it's just more. Hey, we want to get work against somebody else that we're not scheming for and scripting for, different color helmets. I think there's value to that. And I don't know if I would do a scrimmage per se, a full game Saturday scrimmage, but you're going to get plenty of team action, right? I mean, you get plenty of team action, and you're going to learn a lot about yourselves that way. So I think there'd be a lot of merit to that.
For sure.
Ty B with a comment. I think Tyler Buchner is going to be a star if he goes in the shoe and beats Ohio State with a great performance to Notre Dame push Heisman talk. Now, I love this, Ty, because we've gotten so many Tyler Buchner sucks comments lately that I love the fact that we're going the opposite direction and talking about Heisman talk. I think Tyler Buchner is going to be an excellent player as well. I'm not ready to anoint him as the second coming if he beats Ohio State, but it'd be a great start. Notre Dame will push the Heisman talk, especially if it's a quarterback. I mean, the 33 trucking hats with Josh Adams, and we actually saw Notre Dame start a Heisman push last year for 2020 for Ian Book, which I thought was kind of funny. But yeah, Notre Dame will do that. Now, I don't know if they do it to the degree that other programs do it, honestly, because they just haven't had a legitimate Heisman Trophy candidate in a very long time. I didn't really necessarily view Josh Adams as that in 2015 or 17. But I understood the push. I thought it was pretty cool. The 33 trucking thing was pretty cool, but
it was.
He was never going to put up the numbers needed to be a legitimate Heisman contender. So we just haven't seen. I mean, the last time Notre Dame had I'd say legitimate Heisman Trophy contender going into a season, probably Brady Quinn.
Yeah.
Like Manti became a Heisman contender once the season kind of got going.
With the
people
seven
didn't come into
interceptions.
Right. Nobody came into 2012 being like, hey, I think Manti is going to be the Heisman runner-up. But that's an example of when he kind of started getting that Notre Dame, pushed it.
Yeah.
Right. So, it's going to be interesting. But I think if we're going to have a Heisman conversation about a Notre Dame quarterback, it's probably going to be more for 2023. However, we have seen in recent years, sometimes it's good to not be getting the hype. Because when you come into this, like Bryce Young is going to get way more scrutinized this year than he did last year. Way more scrutinized. He could have a better year this year, not finish in the top 4 in Heisman voting. I mean, as far as just execution of the offense and things like that, it's just the nature of it. I mean, it just kind of how we do in media, and where when you're just kind of taking over, starting, you're a new story, you're kind of like the new toy, the new shiny toy. That's going to kind of get some hype. Like, I would argue that Tim Tebow's Heisman year was probably
his worst year.
Yeah,
well, not worse.
I mean,
not
as far as impact on the game, it was definitely the worst Florida team they had during that stretch.
Yeah,
because his 4 years, they won a title in his first year, a title in his third year, and in his fourth year, they went 12-1 and blasted Cincinnati in the Sugar Bowl. The year they went 9-3 or whatever is the year that he won the Heisman, because he was the shiny new toy, right?
Yeah,
and I do think there's some merit to that.
And it's become a kind of a regularity with second-year quarterbacks, right? Like thinking back to Jameis Winston and Johnny Manziel and obviously Bryce Young last year. Like there's been kind of a string of successful second-year quarterbacks. So obviously, I'm not going to predict Tyler Buchner to make that jump. But to answer the question, yes, Ty, if Tyler Buchner goes into the shoe and has a really nice game and they beat Ohio State, everyone's going to be pushing it early on. There's absolutely, because why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you push that on after such a big win like that?
Mm-hmm. We have a Brent Byers asked non-football question. You guys, Apple or Samsung guys? And if it's not Apple, follow-up question, what are you even doing with your life? I mean,
iPhone 11 over here, so I'm an Apple guy.
Yeah. I don't know what iPhone I have. Basically, every time my wife needs a new phone, I buy her a new phone, or she buys herself a new phone, and I get hers from before. So I don't know what version she just handed to me. She puts everything on it and all that, but whatever.
I was an Apple guy. I was an anti-Apple guy for a while. My wife always had an iPhone, and I had some. I don't know. I forget. It was like a Galaxy.
If I could have a small little flip phone, I would have a small little flip phone. I'd be Jethro Gibbs from NCIS. I'd have a flip phone into my 60s if I could, right? But my wife won't let me do that, and it just made sense to kind of take her hand-me-down iPhones. But she's converted me into an Apple guy when it comes to like computers and stuff like that. But for phones, I'm just an Apple guy because she gave me hers. I mean, to me, all I really care about for a phone is if I need to send a text or make a phone call. Like, if I didn't have internet on my phone, I'd just use my iPad. You know what I mean? Or I'd read a book or watch TV or something.
I become an Apple snob, man. Like it actually drives me crazy. It's like a pet peeve of mine now, where I text somebody that has a like a Samsung or something, and it comes up green instead of blue. I'm like, it just bothers me for some reason. I don't know why. It just bothers me.
Okay.
For no real reason either. It's just I guess it's the difference of the color green versus blue. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, what are you doing here, man? Why are you making me look at this green? It's ridiculous.
I judge as soon as I see it's a green box. I'm like, oh man, we got a non-Apple user here. Uh-oh.
Thou shalt not judge phone colors. All right. C-Nut, do offensive commits start rolling in when Dante commits? What do you think?
Yes. Yeah. If Dante does commit to Notre Dame, there will be, I think, a little bit of a wave of offensive recruiting. I would think so, yes.
I don't think either of us think that they won't get anyone until Dante commits. It's just, like you said, it'll be like here we go. And it'll be two classes.
It's a momentum. It's a wave. Yeah. It's a momentum boost for sure.
It'll be two classes. You'll start seeing it impact 2024 as well. You will. And it'll be two things will happen. Number one, what Ryan said, you'll see a wave. Number two, there will be some kids that weren't really looking at Notre Dame or heavily at Notre Dame, all of a sudden have a different level of interest in Notre Dame. That's how it'll go. So that's what happened when they got Jimmy Clausen. I had somebody asked, like, hey, if big-time quarterbacks are supposed to have this impact, why didn't Jimmy Clausen have that impact? And I'm like, do we need to go back and review the offensive recruiting at Notre Dame from the minute Jimmy committed? I mean, they got 200. They got 2 top 100 running backs in the same class as him. They got a top 100 running back in the next year in 2008 in Jonas Gray. They got a top 100 running back again in 2009 in Sierra Wood. Duval Kamara was a 5-star receiver in that class. And another guy that signed in that class. Hey, do you remember this guy, Ryan? He's from Tennessee, played some running back and some receiver, won the Bolitnikoff Award, I think, at Notre Dame. Guy, what's his name? Oh, man. Golden Tate. That's right. That's who it was. He was in that class. The next year they signed this Michael Floyd guy. Do you remember him? All-time leading receiver and catches, yards, and touchdowns in Notre Dame. Got Kyle Rudolph the next year, too. He's a 5-star receiver. He's a pretty good player. I'm not sure if you remember him or not. No. Yeah, those guys came because they got Jimmy Clausen. Okay. I mean, it's just, I mean, that's just the reality of it. So, yeah, there was a wave. And I think we'll see a similar wave. Now, hopefully some of those guys get developed better than they did. But if Dante Moore equals Robert Hughes and Jonas Gray and Sierra Wood types, and especially Golden Tate and Michael Floyd and Kyle Rudolph types, yeah, I'll take that. Sign me up, right? I mean, 2 best receivers Notre Dame's had in the last 20 years. I'll take that because of Jimmy Clausen. So I just think maybe because some people just don't like Jimmy, that they don't want to give him credit for any of that stuff. Like, Jimmy had a big role in that, right? And Jimmy wasn't an active recruiter. It was just he was just Jimmy Clausen.
His presence. Right? That's all it is. Yep.
I want to catch passes from Jimmy Clausen, you know?
Yep.
So Dante will have in my opinion, will have a similar impact. And it's also Charlie was a really good recruiter. Charlie could close on offensive players. And I think that will be a thing too, is now all of a sudden Tommy Rees walks into the room. This is the thing that's impressed me about Tommy Rees the last couple of years. Tommy Rees has had no resume to speak of when he's gone into rooms of high school recruits and parents in the last couple of years. He does now. I've coached in a playoff game. I've coached in the Fiesta Bowl. I've now he was probably going to have 2 quarterbacks get drafted now. I think Jack Cohn will end up getting drafted. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Ryan. I think he'll get drafted.
Slam dunk to get drafted. I would be more surprised if he didn't get drafted at this point.
Right. So Notre Dame went 10 years where it had 1 quarterback drafted, right? Yep. So Jimmy was in the 2010 draft, but after that, you had Deshaun Kaiser, and I think that is it until Ian Book in the 2021 draft. So it's over 10 years. Yeah. Now you're going to have them in back-to-back classes. And then you get Dante Moore and put that feather in your cap. I'm really excited to see what Tommy Rees can do when he's got some of that stuff now behind him from, for his resume. And then what can he do going into the living rooms of some of these top players? That's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. Here's an interesting, Ryan. Blaine Tiller, with all the chaos last year at Clemson, are you expecting a better team this year or another 7-9 win meh kind of squad? But just a reminder, they won 10 games last year. They went 10-3.
Yeah.
9-3 in the regular season, beat Iowa State in the bowl game. So they weren't exactly garbage last year. They started off garbage, but they rallied pretty well, which that's what the ACC can. That's what playing the ACC can do. You can get healthy, in stretches. Thoughts on that, Ryan? Because obviously chaos. I wouldn't call it chaos as much as just there was bound to be that. It was going to happen.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to start with a little bit of the analysis, right? Like it's obviously they have a new offensive coach, Coach Elliott out. I think that's going to. I mean, it just change sometimes can be a big plus, right? Yeah. And I can't imagine DJ Uiagalelei being as bad as he was last year. Like it was just bad, right? Like he was bad. The offensive line was bad. We've seen it at its worst. Can it be worse than that? I doubt it. And then they have some young skill position players that are coming back, like Shipley and Pace at running back, and they have Collins at receiver who had some moments. They have Ngata, the other receiver, Joseph. I think it's Ngata is how you pronounce it, or Nada. I don't know. But you have skill position players that are coming back that have experience, despite having some up and down play. And then you have a lot. I mean, the defense for Clemson should be extremely good. Again, the cornerback position, you got to find a couple guys on the back end, but you have Miles Murphy and Brian Bresee up front. You got that Trenton Simpson kid, the linebacker, who is a freak. That kid I'm excited about already from an NFL draft perspective. Like he is an absolute stud. So the defense should be very good, as it typically is at Clemson. The offensive line should be better because I can't imagine it getting worse. The quarterback should be better because I can't imagine it getting worse. And you have some young receivers and running backs that showed a lot of promise this year. Shipley, I think, is going to take a nice step forward. Collins at receiver. Pace is a good running back. I think that you're going to see growth in those areas, and I can't imagine it getting worse on the offensive line and quarterback. So I think they'll be a lot better.
I think a big problem, their offensive line was just they needed to change. I'm gonna say something else, and I've said this before, Ryan. You can comment on it.
Yep.
I have never thought Tony Elliott by himself was a great coordinator. I have never thought much of Jeff Scott as a head coach by himself. I think they were way better together than they were individually. I think Clemson was successful in 18, 19, and to a degree in 20 because they had better players than anyone they faced any given Saturday, with one exception, and that was the 2019 title game. And then two exceptions, and then the playoff game last year against Ohio State. But even then, I think you could argue they had better top players. I think Ohio State had a little bit more depth. Clemson had some injuries. There's some things going on there. But I think the other thing too is I felt like Tony Elliott was kind of stuck not knowing how to change his offense. Like they recruited one type of player. Big, strapping, not a great running quarterback, big, tall, 6'3", 6 foot. He started recruiting like Brian Kelly, a bunch of tall receivers, right? But then he kept trying to run the same offense they had run before when they had some great slot guys and some guys out of the backfield. And it's like, T. Higgins and Justin, I'm drawing a blank here on Justin Ross.
Yeah.
They weren't great players just because they were tall. They had skill sets that were effective for guys of any height.
Right.
And you didn't have that kind of guy. Justin, the Joseph Ngata kid is a bigger, kind of a Miles Boykin-ish type of guy. He's not Justin Ross. He's not T. Higgins. But they were trying to use him like they did Justin Ross and T. Higgins. Justin Ross wasn't Justin Ross last year. I mean, he's still kind of coming back and all that. And they're like using him in the slot at times, and it's just like, what are you doing? Then he's trying to have DJ run like an offense that he ran with Deshaun Watson,
quarterback power,
and it's like, what are you doing? Like they needed a change. What makes it hard for me to really have an opinion on Clemson is I don't know what Brandon Streeter's going to run. Is he just going to keep running what they've done? Is he going to try to get a little bit more pro-stylish with what they do and kind of go away from they were a pure college spread team for the most part, in my opinion. Like formationally, the run action, the RPOs, like they were pretty much a pure spread team, college spread team. Do they still do that? And do they kind of recruit different types of players? Do they kind of maybe adapt a little bit to DJ's skill set? Or do they say, hey, look, if DJ can't get the job, then that's fine. We'll just bring in Cade Klubnik because he can run that kind of offense that we want to run. That's going to be the question that I don't know. And without knowing that, it's going to be hard for me to really say definitively that this is what Clemson will or won't do. I mean, I don't know how the new coaches are. I don't know enough about those new coaches, but they made some wise decisions when it came to it was time to move on from some people. It was definitely time to move on from Coach Caldwell, who's done some really good things at Clemson, but there comes a point in time where it's like, okay, the game has passed you by to a degree. And the offensive line was just it was terrible in 2020. And that's why last year I predicted that Clemson was not going to be as good as they had been because, I mean, they didn't have Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne to just completely rescue that terrible offensive line. So I think they're going to be better than they were last year. I just can't tell you how much more because I know so little about the coaches that are on the staff. The thing that helps them, Ryan, is they're not going to play a good team until the fourth game of the year. Yep. I mean, they start off with Georgia Tech. They play Furman. Then they play Louisiana Tech. Then they have a stretch of, should be 4 tough games, tough-ish games, Wake Forest, NC State, Boston College, and Florida State. The Florida State BC games are away. Those will be challenges, but that's like deeper into the year. And then, of course, 2 weeks later, they play at Notre Dame, and then they play Miami at home and in South Carolina. So that they don't have the typical early season battle that they've had in the past, where they've played Georgia or A&M or a team like that, Auburn to start, they're going to have some warm-up games, essentially. I mean, Georgia Tech's an okay team, but let's be honest. Georgia Tech's not going to beat Clemson.
No.
And then, Furman and Louisiana Tech. So they're at least going to have some warm-up games to get healthy, whereas last year I kind of felt like the schedule was not set up for them well because last year was a year that they needed, I felt, a bit of a warm-up to kind of get going instead of playing Georgia and NC State and BC 3 of the first 5 games, right? They didn't really recover well from that Georgia game offensively. No. Like they were shell-shocked for a while. Defensively, they played great. I mean, defense played great. I mean, defense played well enough for them to win the ACC last year, in my opinion, with one exception. There's one game that was an exception. But even then they won that game, right? Which is the Wake Forest. I didn't think they played great against Wake Forest. But they still made enough plays to win that game convincingly, but they didn't lose to Pitt because of the defense. Right. They didn't lose to NC State because of the defense, in my opinion. They didn't play great against NC State, but they didn't lose that game because they gave up 20-some points, right? I mean, and there's no way Clemson loses a game scoring in the 20s with giving up points in the 20s with Trevor Lawrence a quarterback.
Absolutely not.
That's and we've seen that. Like the year that it's funny because they were a number 1 seed in 2017, but that was not a great Clemson team. They had a great defense, but that wasn't that we have seen that offense takes a big step back when they don't have Deshaun Watson or Trevor Lawrence quarterback. Big step back because they were not a good offense when they had Kelly Bryant at quarterback.
No, they were not.
Yeah. And he talks about DJ a little bit, kind of the point there. Brent Byers, hard to say there isn't receiving talent with Michael Mayer, Low Styles, Deion Colsey, Tobias Merriweather, plus guys like Braden Lindsey and Avery Davis. I agree.
Yep.
I agree. All right, John Lacey. I know this isn't the normal question, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts on special teams, especially the kicker. Dora was not reliable, in my opinion. Really needed those 3 points in the bowl game. Yeah, John, I don't disagree with you. I think Jay Bramlett was way more inconsistent last year than he was the year before. I thought that was a part of the special teams that was most disappointing to me was Jay Bramlett would have stretches where he would just have some great boots. And then like the bowl game, I thought he had 3 out of 4 punts in a row, like in a sequence of 3 out of 4 punts were just short and gave Oklahoma, like when Oklahoma State was making that comeback, they had at least 2 short fields because of bad punts during that stretch. And I thought the kicking operation overall was just not good last year and, at all. But I can't really tell you what it's going to look like because I've never seen Blake Grupe kick in a game. I've gone back and looked at highlights. I don't know what Josh Bryan's going to be able to do. I don't know what John Sott's going to be able to do as a potential punter. Right? Never seen, Bryce McPherson's going to be a freshman. So I really don't have a comment for you on the kicking operation. Yeah. I think that the return game and the coverage units are going to be better this year. But I don't have an opinion, Ryan. I don't know if I just kind of saw your face and I started naming kickers and you're like, yeah, I don't
well, no. I mean, I obviously I know the names Joshua Bryan and Blake.
No, I mean, like, I don't have any idea what they're going to do. I didn't mean to say that you didn't know who they were.
It's like a little uneasy. You know what I mean? Like you were talking a little bit earlier about like cornerback is a concern, obviously going into the season. I could argue that's the kicking operation, kicking and punting could be the biggest wild card and maybe uneasy spot on the team because you have no idea what to expect. I've heard Blake Grupe's a really accurate kicker, but I've also heard that he doesn't have the greatest range in the world. Joshua Bryan obviously hasn't been in the forefront as a collegiate kicker. Bryce McPherson's a freshman, like you said. Sott's a guy that's coming from obviously an FCS team, and it's. Who knows? I have no idea because it's a little uneasy to be honest because you always obviously preach that it's a third of the game and you don't have much proven commodity right now on that side. So it is a little unsettling to be honest. Like you can't just sit there and say like you're very confident in what the kicking and punting units are going to look like. You have no idea right now.
Yeah, and that's a position I never feel good about uncertainty. Kickers and punters, just because it's such a mental game as much as anything. It really is. So, yeah, that makes me a little bit nervous. John Long, do you think Tom Reese will open up the bag of tricks for Avery Davis this season? Still want to see Avery behind a solid O-line playing Wildcat IB rocks. Thank you for that last part, John. I'm still waiting on the Avery Davis in the back and running the option in the backfield. I'm still waiting on that. I think I'm gonna pass that note along to Tommy Reese because he's definitely gonna listen to me when I say what plays you should run, right? But yeah, I'd love to see that. But Avery's got to get back healthy first, and I think right now it's just when you have the kind of knee injury he had, because I believe he tore multiple ligaments, you never know how he's going to come back. Some guys come back faster, but they lose elusiveness. Is that going to be the case for Avery? We don't know. But if he comes back and he's the same athlete he was before, yeah, I there'd be some value to that. But I think, however, that in 2022, it doesn't make as much sense to do that as it did in 2021. Because in 2021, it would have brought something that you didn't have. Different. I would argue that the quarterback they have now is a better runner than Avery would be.
Sure.
So I don't know if now it makes sense to have Avery as the Wildcat when you could just have Tyler Buckner do that and he weighs 15 extra pounds. You know what I mean? And he's used to doing those things.
Definitely some layers of the offense there should be something in the playbook for a good time, right? Like whether that's a reverse pass or
throw. Right.
Exactly.
The Wildcat is the part I'm referring to. I just don't think there's a need for the Wildcat now. But yes, a throwback screen, pass where he throws or reverse.
Get Avery in the backfield with Tyler Buckner and do something.
Run a sweep, hand it off to him. He pulls up and throws it. Yeah,
exactly.
Those would be some fun things to do. Yes, that would be that. Have Avery in the backfield, Chris Tyree in the slot, right? Have Chris Tyree go in motion one way, run a sweep to him on the. I mean, you could do all types of, and that's the kind of stuff I want to see. I want to see some fun stuff like that. That you do a couple little wrinkles a game. I think kids like that stuff. I think that makes practice like fun. Like, what wrinkle are we going to do this week? Oh, we're putting so and so at running. Whatever, right? And I put Avery as the Wildcat, have Tyler lined up out wide, throw a backwards pass to Tyler, then let Tyler. There's just to have some fun with it, right? Just do a thing or two like that a game. Just a little wrinkle here or two. I think that would be a lot of fun. Here's a really good question. Demetrius Rex, are you taking Jack Cohn in the latter half of 2021 over 2018 Ian Book into the 2018 playoff game with Clemson? Might need to reread to understand the question. No, I get that. What I think you're saying is, am I taking the 2018 regular season version of Ian Book, or am I taking the late season 2021 version of Jack Cohn into the 2018 playoff game? I'm still going with the 2018 version of Ian Book against that Clemson team. Now, we didn't get that version of Ian Book in the playoff game. That was the problem. The reason I would take Ian Book is because that Clemson D-line was nasty. And I want the more mobile quarterback back there.
That's fair.
If Ian Book would have been the guy he was in the regular season. I'll say this, however. I'm more confident that I'd get the late season version of Jack Cohn in the playoff game than I would have got the regular season version of Ian Book in the playoff game, because we never saw Ian Book do that in big games for the most part, especially when it was away from home. So I'd be more confident that I would get the best version of Jack Cohn in that game than Ian Book. But if I knew what I was going to get and I was going to get the regular season version of Ian Book, that's a pretty good – Ian Book went through about a 5-game stretch in 2018, which you could argue was the best stretch of 5 games, best stretch of quarterback passing that we've seen from a Notre Dame quarterback since Jimmy Clausen in 2009, in my opinion. That from like the first start against Wake Forest, the second half of that game, into Stanford, into Navy. I mean, just that stretch where he was completing 70+% of his passes every game, averaging like over 9 yards an attempt. That was about as good as you're going to get. I mean, that was really, really good. Really good. What are your thoughts, Ryan?
I agree on your preference as far as, against that defensive line. I think you want somebody that is able to maneuver, right? So if you're talking about the best version of Ian Book, which we saw at stages obviously in 2018, I would take that as well, just because I think that's a non-mobile quarterback against that type of defensive line could be some trouble. So.
Yeah. Here, and I want to, there was a question kind of about that kind of plays into this question, and I want to find that it was about Jack Cohn, and because we were talking earlier about lacrosse and things like that, and I want to find that question because it was a really good question about Jack Cohn. And we're going to have to wrap up here pretty soon. We're not going to be able to get to all the questions, and we're going to do a 4-hour show today, and neither of us are able to do that. But the question was, where is that question? It was about Jack Cohn and playing lacrosse, because Jack Cohn was initially here we go. Timeout Tom says, I couldn't understand why Jack Cohn was not quicker, considering he was a New York State Player of the Year and from Long Island, which is one of the top areas for lacrosse. He was also committed to Notre Dame as a lacrosse player. The thing that I would say to you is, I don't think Jack Cohn lacks the athleticism. I think, number one, Jack got bigger in college to play quarterback. I don't think – I think, got a little bit more muscular and that kind of thing. I think the foot injury was a part of it, but he wasn't the most escapable guy at Wisconsin. I mean, he had a lot of – you go back and look at that 20 – he had about 4 or 5 plays. He got hit from behind. I think Jack's problem is he did not manipulate from a footwork standpoint the pocket. I don't think it was a lack of athleticism. I've seen way less athletes be far better in the pocket than Jack Cohn was. I don't think Jack was comfortable, and I think part of it, Ryan, was he was going through a transition year. He was mostly an under center. Like, that's a different type of pocket manipulation than just go to predominantly a shotgun offense.
Sure.
I think that was the problem. And I also think Jack got happy feet a little bit last year because he just started anticipating pressure and just didn't set his feet as much. So I think it was more about Jack's footwork. I don't think Jack's going to have like these embarrassing bad times at the combine. I think he'll actually have decent testing numbers at the combine.
Yeah, I think they'll be fine. Yeah.
I think it was a footwork problem. I think it was more of a footwork problem than it was an athleticism problem.
Yeah, because to your point, right? Like, it's athleticism and pocket maneuverability are not really. I mean, like, they can be interrelated, but they're not always interrelated. Maybe the best quarterback in this year's class, as far as pocket maneuverability, is Carson Strong from Nevada, and he is not a great athlete, but he understands how to maneuver in the pocket, how to slide, just the spatial awareness is a big key, obviously.
Who would you say are the 2 best NFL quarterbacks of the last 20 years? Looking at their entire careers, 2 best quarterbacks the last 20 years. I would argue it's Tom Brady.
Tom Brady. Yeah,
Peyton
Tom
Manning.
Brady was the first one. He
right?
was tremendous.
And Peyton Manning, right?
Peyton Manning, yeah.
2 pretty bad athletes when it comes to from an NFL standard, right?
Yeah.
2 guys that you're not going to, have on your team when you're saying we're going to get into like an off-season, sprint contest and athleticism contest. That's not your first picks, right? Both great in the pocket. Both great at manipulating the pocket, right? Using their feet to buy time, find openings, get the ball out. So as you said, if you have great athleticism, you can then be great in the pocket. But being a great athlete doesn't mean you're going to be great in the pocket, and being a bad athlete doesn't mean you're going to be bad in the pocket.
Yeah.
So, like Jimmy Clausen's problem was he just didn't have maneuverability. Like he was stiff in the pocket. It's not that he wasn't I wouldn't say Jimmy's any worse of an athlete than Tom Brady was necessarily.
Tom Brady ran like a 5'2", had a sub 30-inch for
awful.
Awful athlete. Yeah.
But the footwork, the presence in the pocket was the thing. So I think that really speaks to it. Timeout, Tom. Here's my prediction for next season's starting linebackers. Mike will be Jordan Patejo, Will, Prince Collie, Rover, Maris Luafau. I don't see. I'd be shocked if.
I was going to say I think the Rover days for Maris are well behind him.
Agree.
So yeah. I like the 3 players in some type of combination, but
I just don't trust Jordan Patejo. I'm sorry. I don't. I mean, I don't trust him to be my Mike linebacker, to make line calls. Like, I don't trust him to show up. I'm not going to say what I was going to say. I just don't trust him. He's got to prove a lot to me before I'm ready to trust Jordan Patejo, especially as the Mike. And so I couldn't go there. And I'm not ready to. JD Bertrand had 100+ tackles and 7-8 tackles for loss on an 11-2 team. And all we're focusing on is the couple bad games he had and not focusing on the fact he played pretty good football at other times. And that was his first year as a starter. He wasn't even a rotation guy in 2020. He did pretty well for a first-year starter, and I think he's going to get better. So I think we are all dismissing J.D. Bertrand a little bit too easily, in my opinion. I think J.D. is going to have a chance to do some things for Notre Dame this year. Now, could he get beat out and not start? Yeah, because there's some good players there. I mean, Bo Bauer can beat him out. if Jordan Botelho grew up a ton, I'm not discounting that Jordan athletically wouldn't be the right guy for that job. There's just a lot more than athleticism that goes to being a Mike linebacker, a lot more.
Yeah.
And to your point, I do think Maris's days at Will are done. I think if anything, we'll see him and Prince Collie playing together. However, if Prince is just so good that you can't take him off the field, I could see a scenario in which Marist at Rover makes more sense than Prince Collie at Rover, based on his body type. So overall, I agree with your point. But I'm saying my point is, if you have to get if you have to get Marist and Prince on the field, they're just clearly your two best linebackers. You can't keep rotating them, even though, because I would see they're both their both best points. I say either one of them moves to Mike, that'd be Prince, or B, one of them moves to Rover, and I think that would probably be Marist.
That would be a lot of athleticism on the second level if that was the scenario, though.
A lot of length. There's no doubt about it. No doubt about it. John Long, after listening to your other pods, I have to assume 21 personnel is a real option this season. Any fun ideas for play types with two back sets? Oh, John, dude, I could talk all day about different 21 personnel plays. But honestly, we saw some of them this year. I mean, not 21 personnel plays, but we saw backs being used in ways that would be good for that. I love when you have two backs, like 21 personnel with both of them in the backfield. I love action one way, screens the next. I love having one guy pass pro and another guy running, arrows, swings, things like that. If you have one of them that can line up out wide, I love the wheel routes. We saw some of those this year. And then, of course, just go get open when Tyler Buckner runs around, which we saw from, Tyler Buckner, Chris Tyree, and that was at the Purdue-Toledo game, right? When Tyler's scrambling around, defense comes up, and he just knocks that thing right over top, hits Chris Tyree, 55-yard touchdown, right? When teams blitz, instead of always using your backs, this is what I thought was one of the best calls Tom Reese has made at Notre Dame, was the check that they had. It wasn't a call because he taught them to Jack Cohn made the call, but it's because he was prepared and taught by Tommy Reese. When you see this, make the call. So it's still, to me, a call from Tommy Reese. He didn't necessarily call it from the booth at that time, which makes it even more impressive to me. But it was Oklahoma State showing blitz. It's a very heavy blitz look for them. So instead of having Chris Tyree step up and pick up the blitz, let's just release him and hit him over top. He catches it a couple yards downfield, 52-yard touchdown. Right? Like, to me, stuff like that I love too. I hate when every time you see pressure, you just automatically max pro or, tag your back to stay in. Like, make that team pay for bringing a blitz, right? Like, get Chris Tyree the ball in space. Get Logan Diggs. You can't do it every time. But if that's a healthy enough, response from you to a blitz, they're going to stop blitzing you, right? I mean, you're going to think twice about that next time. I don't know how many more times we saw Oklahoma State call that blitz again after Chris Tyree went 52 yards. So, man, but we could do a whole show on that, John, and we're not going to do that because we're already way deep into this. Brent Byer says, I like Colsey to be a dude. Lindsey should be closer to his potential with competent coaching. Agree. I think the impact the new receivers coach will make will be monumental. We'll find out September 3rd. I agree with you, Brent. I agree with you. David Solomon responded, I don't know, Colsey didn't get the playing time and opportunity Styles did, but what I did see out of Colsey didn't get the sense he's going to be a dude. I want and hope to be wrong. I think you're going to be wrong, David. I think far too often we look at how a guy plays when he's young and assume that's who he is. I think, number one, you have to remember Deion is a year younger than most kids in his grade. So he's a very young player. He did not get a ton of coaching in high school and then got none at Notre Dame. And so I just don't think Deion was real confident in what he was doing. And the situation is that I'm just telling you, and believe me or not, younger players just weren't prepared by Dell Alexander. Deion got thrust onto the field because of injuries that happened in games, right? I mean, that's just the reality. And I don't think he was prepared to be effective. But the God-given tools are there. It's just he was not as advanced as Lorenzo was in regards to how to play the game, in my opinion. And I think that was a big factor. But I think Deion Cole's going to be fine. And I've heard from plenty of sources around. I don't know if you've been told this by anybody, but there were times in practice last year where the defense was just like, I can't check 16. We can't guard that guy. Just because it would be like in times when it's like it's not about reacting to the coverage and it's just, okay, it's one-on-ones. It's you're running a go route and it's like, I know what I'm doing. And he would just, I mean, you just couldn't cover him. You know, just even if you covered him, you couldn't cover him. You know what I mean? Because he's so long.
Good to hear.
You just throw the back shoulder to him. So I think the talent's there. It's just about, can he consistently do it and execute? That'll be a different question. But I think he's another guy that should benefit from having a guy like Chancey Stuckey. And one of the concerns I would have had about Chancey Stuckey's inexperience would have been, since he is a 5'10" receiver, how you teach a 5'10" receiver to run routes is going to be different than how you teach a 6'4".
Sure.
But, Ryan, I think you would agree that question got answered last year by the improvement we saw from Tyquan Thornton, who's like, what, 6'2.5", 6'3"?
6'3", yeah, somewhere in that ballpark.
But the thing is, Ryan, he's not just 6'3", he's long-limbed.
Yes.
Which is the bigger concern than 6'2" or 6'4". It's long-limbed, because those guys tend to be longer striders. How you teach him to break down on the top end and how you teach him to run routes is going to be different than a 5'10" guy. So that concern for me with a guy with, I don't care if the receivers coach been coaching for a while. I don't care if he's 5'10" or 6'5". But since Chancey Stuckey is such a young coach, you know, he's going to be leaning on what he did as a player, how he was taught.
Sure.
It would have been a concern if I didn't see. I mean, Tyquan Thornton was a way different player last year than he was the year before. And I think Chancey Stuckey has to get some credit for that, in my opinion.
Yeah, very different.
Jay Montalbano, Brian, I'm going to ask you this, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
If Tyler Buckner and Dante Moore were in the same recruiting class, who would you want?
Man. So, I mean, the answer would be Dante. It's an imperfect comparison, though, because, again, like, I would have loved to see how high Tyler Buckner could have climbed in recruiting rankings if he did not miss his senior year, right? I feel like that year of development did hurt him in some ways, obviously, in a lot of ways, not some ways, a lot of ways. I would take Dante in this vacuum comparison, but that's just I still think it's a little bit of an imperfect comparison to them.
I'd have to ask you, Jay, what offense am I running? I mean, that's the thing. Am I running an offense that requires more of a running quarterback? Then I'm taking Tyler Buckner. Am I running an offense that's going to look like what Sark ran in 2020 at Alabama? Then I'm taking Dante Moore. So I think that's part of it too. But I'll say this, like, listen, I think Tyler Buckner as a junior in high school was further along as a playmaker than Dante Moore was. I mean, he was a special, special player. Dante gets the edge in regards to just his ability. You talk about sitting in the pocket and being able to read and all that. Dante's further along. And I think Dante has a stronger arm than Tyler had as well. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that, but I thought he had a stronger arm. But it just, again, it depends on what offense are we playing in. You know, if I'm having to make that choice. If I'm playing in an offense with read zones and quarterback runs and you need that as part of your offense, I'll put it like this. If I'm running Clemson's offense, I'm taking Tyler Buckner. If I'm running Steve Sarkisian's offense, I'm taking Dante Moore. I mean, that has to be factored in to this equation. If I'm running Mike Leach's offense, I'm taking Dante Moore. If I'm running Phil Longo's offense at North Carolina, I'm probably taking Tyler Buckner. So that's the other part of it too, is not all offenses are equal. And I think Dante does things better than Tyler, and Tyler does things better than Dante, which is going to dictate who I'm taking. For what I think Tommy Rees wants to do offensively, I'm just going to be honest. I think Dante's probably an even better fit, because I think Tommy would prefer to have a quarterback and just sit back and pick you apart. Mm-hmm. I think that's what he would prefer. You know, if Tommy had to pick, like, okay, if you could pick an offense and say, ideally, that's what I want it to look like, I think it's going to look like more of what Alabama was in 2020 compared to what other people do. That's just kind of what I think. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that, but that's kind of how I feel about that.
It's very fair. It's very fair.
It's a good question. I wanted to pull that up because, like, that's kind of like, let's put you on a spot kind of question. Like, that's an interesting one. I still, to your point though, I would have still loved to have seen what Tyler Buckner would have been as a senior.
Yep.
Thad Farley, what's the worst Power 5 college football stadium that you've been to? Mine is Northwestern. I can't disagree with you on that one, Thad. And their fans are terrible. Like, they were so nasty and disrespectful. This is the 2018 game. I would say, I'm trying to think of any others that have been bad. I really can't think of a lot of others that I haven't liked. Some of them are smaller, like Wake Forest has a really small stadium, but it's really nice. Oh, I don't like BC Stadium. I don't know if you've ever been to that one. I don't like their stadium very much.
No,
it's kind of, but no, a lot of stadiums, like the smaller stadiums, sometimes are a little like. I love Wake Forest Stadium. Like it's a really cool little place to watch. It's not a bad seat in the house because it's so small.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to go with Northwestern. It's dumpy. The field stinks. The fans are terrible. That's a pretty bad place to watch a game.
Mm-hmm.
Bevan O'Neill, how much has been said about Buckner's lack of experience now that he's played last year and had extra 15 bowl practices? Is that excuse gone this season?
I mean, it's gone to a certain extent. Like obviously you're going to expect more out of him than if it was just a true freshman. But I mean, he still hasn't started a football game, so there's still going to be some acclimatization, obviously. But to your point, it's not like he's a true freshman walking in there and has never played a snap of college football. So you should expect more than that traditional year one freshman, right? So
I think it depends on, to Ryan's point, it depends on what you mean by excuse being gone. Is Tyler Buckner still going to make some young guy mistakes this year? Yeah. Hey, guess what? The Heisman Trophy winner made a really big young guy mistake in the national title game. That throw he made at the end of the game and got picked off and ran back. I don't know who. I still don't know who he's throwing to. I have no clue who he's throwing to. Young guy mistake. Mac Jones doesn't make that mistake because he was a senior. Bryce Young won't make that mistake in 2022, right? So he's still going to make some young guy mistakes, but you're not going to use his youth as an excuse if he goes out there and throws 7 picks in the first 3 games, right? That's just bad decision making. That's not a lack of experience. But I also don't think we should expect him to go out and look like Peyton Manning, the first however many games of the year either. So I think that's kind of part of it too. Is it's just about what are your expectations for him in this year? I think he could be an impact playmaker that's going to make some big time plays and he can lead the offense. But I also don't think he's a guy that I'm necessarily going to kind of look at and say, hey, this is, you live with this and this and this because he's young. I'm not going to accept that as much this year. And Ryan will be right back, by the way. David Freeman says Notre Dame sells its 4 for $40 advantage. What are some of the best, most interesting, most surprising careers that Notre Dame players have gone into after football? I appreciate the super chat there, David. I'll be completely honest with you. I don't know a lot about what Notre Dame guys do when they leave. So I couldn't really tell you. Just some of the ones that I know of that I thought were interesting. Corey Minor ran a bunch of Domino's. Like he was actually in a Domino's commercial a few years ago. You remember Corey Minor that played defensive end at Notre Dame? He was in a Domino's commercial a few years ago because he's an owner of some Domino's. And I thought that was pretty cool. Todd Light owned some nightclubs, and then he sold those, and then he did some other things. And he sold those, made a lot of money. But I honestly don't know that if I could tell you what a lot of Notre Dame players do when they leave. It's hard for me to. I just have never really paid a ton of attention to that kind of thing, Ryan. I don't know if you know of any interesting stories, but I wish I had some cooler stories for you. But I don't really know what most Notre Dame players do. To be honest, I don't really pay attention to it. So sorry.
because most jobs obviously aren't going to be like big media driven that you're going to talk about a ton, right? I mean, obviously, like Tommy Rees going from starting quarterback at Notre Dame to offensive coordinator at Notre Dame is kind of cool, I guess, right? I mean, that's the stuff that you hear about, though, for obvious reasons.
I'm curious to see how Brandon Wimbush's company does, if it's able to take off, with what he's doing with NIL stuff. That'll be interesting. I'm very curious to see that, but.
Yeah. Now that's going to be interesting in general. I know there's another company that I think Mackenzie Milton and De'Ara King are doing. That's like a NIL based thing as well. So it's
going to be interesting. Yeah. Brandon Plesner says, if Justice Haynes commits elsewhere, would you like to see the staff take a second running back still? Would really like Jaden Lamar in the class. I'm going to let you comment on this because I think you like Jaden Lamar a lot more than I do.
I do like Jaden Lamar, man. I think he would bring a different element to the running back room, obviously comparative to Cedric Irvin Jr. I think he's a really smooth pass catcher. I think he has that ability. I think there's some comparisons, and he's not the same player at all, but like a little bit of Kyron Williams to this game, I think a little bit. So I would be completely fine with Notre Dame taking Jaden Lamar as a second running back. Ultimately, I don't know if that is a reality that we will see, because I think that Notre Dame is making a push, obviously, for Haynes, and I think that they would kick the tires with maybe a little more of a well accoladed running back, I guess, if we want to phrase it like that. Obviously, a high upside type of running back, or else I think they would be okay if it was just Cedric Irvin Jr. in the class.
Mm-hmm. I'm not high enough on. I think Jay Lamar is a good football player, and if he was the only back in the class, I'd be okay with that. I don't think he's as I don't see his skill set translating to what Kyren Williams did as much as some people think it will. I just don't. I see a different type of athleticism than Kyren. Kyren was a legitimately wide receiver up until his junior year. I mean, he had, I think, over 2,000 receiving yards in high school, and it wasn't because of what he did out of the backfield. He was legitimately a wide receiver for a chunk of his high school career. I think halfway through his junior years when he kind of started transitioning to more of a full-time running, I believe is how that went down. But I'm just not as high on Jay Lamar. I think that unless you lose a guy from your roster, one of the sophomores is going to transfer. Chris Tyree has a breakout year and he goes pro. Barring that, I think 6 backs on a roster is one too many, in my opinion. And you're going to have Chris Tyree, Logan Diz, Audric Estime, Jadarian Price, and Cedric Irvin. That's 5. 6 backs is just too many for me, in my opinion. But if they lose a guy, 4 is not enough, in my view. So that's where maybe you could see a second guy. But I personally, Ryan, I'm just not. He's a good player. If I'm going to add a second back, he needs to be a really good player. It's kind of
dynamic.
So I want to make sure, I think Jay Lamar is a top 200 to 250 kind of guy.
Sure.
It just, like, right now I'd have him ranked ahead of Cedric Irvin because we've seen him do more than Cedric, right?
Sure.
But I've kind of thrown my asterisk by Cedric Irvin. I'm going to kind of really hold a more sold opinion on Cedric until we see him at Columbus, because I want to see him actually in an offense that features him, which Belliver Prep didn't do enough of, in my view. But even then, I'm still just not, like, I'm not adding 2 just good backs in the class. Like, you could say, well, they did that 2 years ago. Let's just assume that you just think that Diggs and Estime are just both just good backs. Okay, that's even more reason. Don't do it again 2 years later, number one. But number two, I don't view them. I think I'd have Diggs and Estime both ranked higher than Lamar and Cedric Irvin as juniors.
Okay.
Especially Diggs. I loved Diggs in high school. Estime really broke out as a senior. He's 230 pounds. You know what I mean?
He's a New Jersey
guy,
man.
Boy. Yeah, Jersey tough, baby. There we go. So I just think both of those guys are better. So I personally would not add 2 unless I lost somebody, unless it was a Justice Haynes type of back. And the other thing is, this is not a great running back class. I'd rather see that extra scholarship be used for another receiver, a hybrid guy that can do different things. I'd rather see a second tight end than a second back in this class. A 5th offensive lineman, another D lineman, with the talented linebackers on the board, Ryan, you're working on the story now that kind of talking about, like, if you look at the guys left on the board at linebacker, Jaden Osbury, Samuel Mpemba, Darren Gillette, who you and I are going to talk more about here soon, because that dude is a freaky athlete. And who am I missing? Tamir Robinson. If 2 of those dudes want to come, am I saying no to any of them? Nope. I might say yes to all 4 of them, because, Mpemba can do so many different. It's just, who do you turn down? You're not going to get all those guys to say yes, but you get my point. I'd rather have an extra one of those guys than Jay Lamar. That's just kind of where I'm coming from. So, not that he's a bad player. He's a good player. I just don't see a guy that, boy, you got to have that guy in the class. Couple things here. Freddie C at 03. When Kelly first offered Rodney Gallagher, he was interested in playing both football and basketball, but sounded like Kelly didn't like that. Would Freeman be open to him playing basketball if he decides to do both? Just quickly, Rodney Gallagher is not pursuing basketball.
He's not playing basketball.
Next level.
Yeah.
The next level. He's still playing high school basketball, but what we're saying is he's not going to play college basketball. So I don't think it's going to matter. But I would imagine he would, if that's what it took to get him here, with how much I'm told that the Notre Dame staff likes Rodney Gallagher, I think they'd have told him, yeah, you want to play basketball, go for it. So, Rob Osgood. Hey, guys, in my opinion, this spring is a must to change the culture of Kelly being so-so to being like Holtz being the best. I feel Freeman can do this. What will it take to make it happen? I think you kind of answered your own question, Rob. It's a culture change, right? I think that he's put together a strong staff. I think there's talent. I think they've done a ton of upgrades at Notre Dame. I think it's a culture change. And we talked a lot about this yesterday. I would encourage you to listen to yesterday's show. It's about a no excuses, competitive, super confidence that they need to establish that when they step on the field, I don't care, Bama. Oh, that's Bama. So what? We're freaking Notre Dame. Well, Georgia, defending champs. I don't care. We're Notre Dame. And I don't think Notre Dame's always had that. And matter of fact, I know they haven't had that in a lot of these big games. And I think it started at the top. And just go look at the way that they game planned against Alabama last year. They game planned not to get blown out. They did not game plan to win. And I think that says a lot about how the program was like. Jens Irish, how much of the problem with quarterback planner BK was due to a lack of development versus an inability to properly identify talent? The mainstays of quarterback were never the elite recruits under Brian Kelly. You want to take a shot at that one?
Yeah, no, I think definitely more of a lack of development than anything. I mean, because they still signed guys like Phil Dracovic and Tyler Buckner and Brandon Wimbush and Malik Zaire. There's been talent in the quarterback room. I think it's a big misnomer to say that there hasn't. So definitely, I think development is more the issue than the recruiting side of the formula. Because I think that there's a good chance. And here's, I guess, an early draft take for next year. I think there's a chance that Phil Dracovic goes in the first round next year if he stays healthy. Mm-hmm. So I don't think lack of talent is an issue at Notre Dame at the quarterback position.
Agree. I mean, if you can't get more out of a group that, think about this. Gunnar Kiel, who I didn't love, Everett Golson, Malik Zaire, Deshaun Kaiser, Brandon Wimbush, Phil Dracovic, Tyler Buckner in a 10-year period, less than 10-year period. If you can't get a quarterback play out of that, the problem's not them. The problem's you as a coach. You can't get one of those guys to hit, and they all regressed as they got. Here's the key, the telltale sign for me. A lot of those guys were really pretty decent early and got worse. That's the sign of bad coaching to me. Even Ian Book got progressively worse the longer he stayed in Notre Dame.
Yeah,
that's a problem, and that's a coaching problem. That's not a player problem, and so yeah, it's a development problem. Now, are there times where they misevaluate on it? Sure, everybody does. Look at some of the bums that was so disrespectful. I'm sorry. Look at some of the guys that Alabama signed at quarterback, and they just were not good players, right? I feel I shouldn't have. That just I feel bad that came out because if you're getting a scholarship at Alabama, you're not a bum, right?
Right.
They just weren't good football players. They weren't Alabama caliber football players, and Bama signed them, and some of them they thought were going to be really good players, and they weren't. Everybody misses. I think the fact when you miss that consistently, it's not an evaluation problem. It's a coaching problem. And hopefully that gets fixed, because what we're going to find out is if Tommy Rees was more of the problem or if Brian Kelly was the problem. I feel it was a Brian Kelly problem. It's just and there was a stretch with Mike Sanford where I think recruiting became a problem. He identified Avery Davis as a quarterback in Notre Dame. That should never have been the case. Avery Davis was always going to be an athlete that was going to move somewhere else. Got a super chat from Byron Davis. Thank you for that, Byron. Any off-field activities teams do in the spring to build cohesion and culture, field trips to fun places, charitable visits to the community, etc. Favorite you have had when you were coaching? So, Byron, they do a ton of stuff in the community. That's one thing they definitely do a lot of. They have done other things in this, not during the spring per se, but in the summer and fall camp. They'll go do things. That's part of why they went to Culver. Was because when they weren't practicing, they would get jet skis and they'd have all types of fun activities. So they'll do a lot of stuff like that. I didn't like doing that stuff as a coach. Let the players go do that. I wanted to be in the lab, breaking down film and stuff. But when one of the places I was at, we would actually we would kind of work with the park services or whatever. I don't even remember where it was. And we'd go to local playgrounds and stuff like that. And we'd put mulch down and we'd clean up trash and, just really try to make the community nicer. I'm always a big fan of that. We saw that from what we did. If you can impact the community you're living in, if everybody just said, hey, I'm going to take a step to help my community, we'd have a much nicer community. If every person that chose to throw crap out of their car at getting off the highway just decided not to do that, we'd have, have a cleaner community, right? It's just about everybody trying to impact their community positively. So whenever we did stuff like that, that was always tough for me because I felt like with football players, especially at a place like Notre Dame, you can get a sense of everything, especially like the big time guys, Ryan, it's like you've been told how great you are, and life's been kind of not for every kid, but life's kind of easy. You're getting free meals here, you're getting free trips there, you're getting this, you get free clothes and all this kind of stuff, especially nowadays. 30 years ago, there wasn't as much for these kids. Sometimes it can be kind of good to take them out in the community and say, hey, look, there are people that are really struggling are they going to be able to put a meal on their table for their kids tomorrow? And like, you want to go complain about what's going on with you at the University of Notre Dame? Like, I think sometimes it's good to get them in that thing because, number one, they can really make an impact. That's priority number one. But then also there's some building there of like, hey, man, you're all in your feelings all the time about your lack of playing time. Imagine if you were in a situation where you were living day to day about whether or not you could put food on the table. Now, there are some Notre Dame players that have been in that, but you're not in that situation in Notre Dame anymore. And I think that can be a benefit to like, hey, man, just give you it's about perspective. It doesn't mean playing time's not important. It's just maybe you should it's not that, it's not that big of a deal, in my opinion. So I don't know, Ryan, because you were a high school coach. Did you guys ever do anything like fun like that, like with the team building thing? It's a little different in high school. Like,
not really. I mean, I think we went like on bowling nights out and stuff like that. So it was nothing substantial. There was service that people did for the community, like you're kind of saying, and volunteered and done all that type of stuff. But that was more like an individual activity than like a team activity. So I mean, just more like bowling trips. I think we went to the movie one time. I think we went to see Invincible when it first came out because we're right outside of Philly, right? So that was like a night out type of thing. Yeah. You know what I mean? So
I always like doing bowling because I was a good bowler, so I could impress kids. So like,
show it off the kids.
Yeah, there you go. Like, show that you're good at something, right? Not just this former coach, So
right,
earn a little bit of respect. Another super chat from John Klimek. I want to see a bigger jump in mop-up duty. I always felt Kelly took his foot off the gas. I want to see wide receivers catching the ball in stride as well. I'm with you, John. I would love to see younger guys. And when they get in the game, let them play.
Right.
I mean, like, how many passes did Drew Pine throw in 2020? Like, talk about just you played a schedule where you had, 3 opponents with a winning record? 4. And 2 of those opponents with a winning record went 6-5, right? Pitt and BC. And your backup quarterbacks threw like 6 passes. Tosh Baker played like 7 reps in a year where you knew everyone was going to get eligibility back. Like, that was absurd. Yeah, your backup quarterbacks threw a combined 6 passes in 2020. Drew Pine threw 3. Brendan Clark threw 3. Like, come on, man. Like, give me a break. And like, Ohio State had an even weirder year. I'm going to be honest. Ohio State 2 years ago, because of the COVID, they never had their number. CJ Stroud never threw a pass because it was a weird year because they had to use every rep possible to get caught up. So like, end of games were almost like, hey, we need to get our starters these reps kind of thing, So they'd maybe play a little deeper into games than they otherwise would. For example, this year, Alabama's backup quarterbacks threw 24 passes this year. Like, they can do that against an SEC schedule, but Notre Dame can't get more than 6 against an all-ACC schedule. And, they also played South Florida. Whew. That was a tough one, right? So ridiculous. Another super chat and thank you for that, John. Another super chat from Casey Martinez. Thank you, Casey. Now that the head coach diva is gone, do you think the culture is more serious intent than show? Sorry, not sorry about the diva comment. I had worse. Hey, I think this is the right audience to throw shade at the former head coach because we were the only place throwing shade at him when he was still here. So you're fine there, man. No worries on that one. But serious intent, I think it can be. I think it can be, Ryan. I don't know I don't know if we know enough about what Coach Freeman is going to do that we can say for sure it's going to be that way. I'm optimistic.
Yeah. Oh, no, very optimistic. I got to see it happen, though, obviously, right? Like, it's a results-based business. So let's see it happen.
Yeah. Talent's there.
For sure.
Yep. Nick A., I'm excited to see Colsey and Styles in the field with another year of development, especially with an actual receivers coach. You are not alone on that one, Nick. Super chat from Freddie CO. It is, let's see here. When Rodney Gallagher was first offered, it sounded like Kelly didn't want him to play football and basketball. Would Freeman be open to both? We did address this earlier, but you gave a super chat this time, so I wanted to bring it up. And then the second part of it was, I know he is just focusing on football, but sounds like Penn State and West Virginia are higher on the list because they let him play both if he decides. I think that was the case early, Ryan. I don't think that's the case now, which is why I think it sounded to me from talking to you, and I could be reading into this, that he's almost rebooting his recruitment a little bit since his decision to just focus on.
I think so, because he kind of took a step back during basketball season just in general, and I think that also Notre Dame has gotten a lot more serious, obviously, about their intent towards him since the new year, right? Like the new staff is very high on Rodney Gallagher, so he has become a clear priority for the school as well. So I think there's, a combination of everything, I think. And I would agree that I think that it was probably much more of a driver early on. But as Brian stated earlier in the show, he does not have the intentions to play basketball on the college level anymore.
All right. Keith Wiegand says, Ryan, where's Kyle Hamilton going in the draft? Once you start, you're going to get more of this as we get closer to the draft, which I know you're excited about. And just so people know, we actually have Ryan and I are going to hammer out the specifics of when those shows are going to be, but we are going to have a draft. Ryan's going to do a lot of stuff for the draft. He's going to try to interview prospects, and he's going to bring other people on. He's going to have some stuff breaking guys down. He and I will do some. Some of it's going to be him doing other things, but we're going to definitely take advantage of Ryan's draft expertise as we get closer and closer to the combine's coming up here in a little over a week, and pro day is going to happen at the end of March, and then the draft it's in late April again this year, right?
Yep, I think April 29th, something like that. Yeah,
we'll definitely ramp things up again as we get closer to the draft. Ramp things up as we get closer to the draft, and we'll have Ryan do all that. So I just wanted to kind of let people know that to start expecting that. But anyway, to the question, Ryan.
I would be shocked if Kyle Hamilton falls out of the top 10, despite him being a safety and people thinking that there's, obviously an undervalued layer to the safety position, which there is to a degree. Safeties don't usually go too high. But I think that top 10 with this type of player, for my money, he's the best player in the draft. He's the only player that I would even closely resemble to a generational type prospect. So I think he goes top 10. I think it starts, the conversation honestly should start very early. I would say number 3, I think, is the Houston Texans. The Jets have 2 picks in the top 10. I know some of them have, some ill feelings toward drafting a safety, top 10 again after the Jamal Adams debacle, but he's a very different player, obviously, than Jamal Adams. So Giants, maybe another team to pair with Xavier McKinney. There's going to be plenty of suitors that could use Kyle Hamilton. I think it's top 10 somewhere.
What do you think I thought I had muted myself on that one. What do you think the floor is for Kyle Hamilton in the draft? Like, do you see a spot where there's no way he's going past this spot?
It might be a little aggressive, but I think the Jets had the 10th pick. I think that's their second pick in the top 10. That's my spot. I think I would be really shocked if he falls out of the top 10, to be honest. So I think the floor is 10th overall potentially.
If the floor is not Denver at 9, I'm going to cry. And I know that Denver has other safeties, but I would just love to see Justin Simmons and Kyle Hamilton in the same backfield.
That would be a great pairing, man. That's a lot of length and a lot of range.
Yeah. Call me, great. It's my team. But no, I'd be really shocked if he fell out of the top 10. And you talked about the Jamal Adams debacle. The guy still made 3 All-Pro teams. People act like he was a bum.
He was a good player. He was a good player.
He wasn't the number 4 overall pick good player, right? What was he, 4 or 5? What did he 6?
I think 6. He was the highest drafted safety in a long time, and it wasn't even. Obviously he wanted out there, right? So he basically forced his way out through the trade, and that's kind of I think where the ill feelings. But honestly, looking back on it, great decision by the Jets because he's a pure box safety, and you don't pay that guy. You just don't pay.
Right. So yeah, it's I would love to see him go top 5 just because of what I think it would mean for Notre Dame. I think it'd be huge for Notre Dame. All right, Brent Byers, what impact do you think an opening win versus Ohio State in their house has on the program from a recruiting standpoint, national narratives, momentum inside the program, in the locker room, etc.? Let me go first here, Ryan. I think the latter part is more important because the latter leads to the impact in the former. And what I mean by that is if you go out and beat Ohio State, but then lose to North Carolina on the road 3 weeks later, that momentum's gone.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to keep winning, right? Like if Notre Dame had that huge monumental win over Stanford in 2012, and as I've tried to remind people, you have to remember nobody on that Notre Dame team in 2012 had played in a game where they had ever beaten Stanford, right? That was the giant that they had to slay back then. And I think that led to them beating Oklahoma. I think that team, once they beat Stanford, like nobody can beat us now. They had a confidence about them. And I think that this team would have a similar boost, in my opinion, which would then lead to continued wins, because the continued wins are what's going to lead to a bigger impact on the program. Like if you're going to talk about the 2022 team, yeah, there's some benefits to it. Recruiting trail to a degree, benefits to it. But if you beat Ohio State in the opener and go 9-3, it's not going to move the needle on your program, because you're going to have some losses that negate that win, right? You got to keep winning. That's the big thing. And, you still got to go 11-1 or 12-0. You still got to make the playoff and do damage. It's, by the time you get to the end of the season, if you get into the playoff again and lose by 20 again, nobody's going to give a rip that you beat Ohio State. Just not really. I think recruiting would be the only place where it would matter. I think that's the only place where no matter what happens next, it may have a longer term impact. But overall for the program, I just don't see it having much of an impact unless it's followed by it creates a momentum to the confidence and the momentum. I think that would be the bigger impact. But recruiting, maybe like, okay, Cardinal Tate, maybe it has an influence on him. But we've seen Notre Dame beat teams and lose kids to those teams all the time. Like, sure. I mean, it just is the case. So
I think recruiting impact was definitely the one where I was like, yeah, that's probably the biggest impact overall. Like, because like you're saying, there's obviously more to just one performance, right? That can make like a culture or the momentum, all that type of stuff. But from a recruiting impact, I mean, obviously with geographically where Ohio State is in the same region, beating an Ohio State would be huge, especially beating them at home. And the visitor list is going to be crazy for that game, to say the least. So there's, obviously always going to be Notre Dame targets that are also very interested in Ohio State. And it would have a huge impact, I think. And there's a lot of players right now that are on the board for Notre Dame that are looking forward to seeing what the result is on the field. What's the product? What is it going to look like? And starting out a win like that against a perennial power like Ohio State and one of the great programs of college football would be monumental from a recruiting standpoint.
Yeah, no doubt. The Kinger 321, Brian, are there any stores that sell individual Built Bars? I don't know. I've never seen one. I don't know if they do or don't. I don't think that they do. I think that's what they have. They have a thing called ambassador program. That's what we're part of, where we get a certain cost. We get a little bit of a kickback for stuff that we sell with our promo code. I think that's kind of the route they've chosen to go. They've wisely kind of made an exclusive thing, like it, and I think that's good for branding, right? I think that's make it like some of the things that they only have. They can make whatever they want, you know what I mean? But they just choose to, because it sells better, right? Like I do that when cookies and cream comes back up, I'm gonna have 3-4 boxes because they go off and they don't have them for a while. But they may sell them in stores. I'm not saying they don't. I have just never seen them in a store. All right. I don't know if you have.
I haven't either. I've only bought them and delivered to the house, but I will say they were delicious. So if you haven't tried them, you definitely should.
Promo code Irish Breakdown. It's in the description bar below. It's a great question, the Kinger. If you use the promo code Irish Breakdown, one word, you get 10% off your whole purchase. I'm telling you, I got my my banana cream pie. Right? Got that one. It's a puff. It's got a little bit of marshmallow. Got the strawberry the other day. Tried that one for the first time. That's really good. My favorites are still cookie dough and cherry barcia are still my two favorites. And it actually has chunks of strawberry in it. And as you see, I mean, you see the nutritional value in there. It's 140 calories, 17 grams of protein and only 5 grams of sugar in the strawberry one. You actually get chunks of cherry in there, so it's
really it's 100% real chocolate, and every fruit flavor that you get has real chunks of fruit in it, which is fantastic.
It's really good. And I have not bought a candy bar. Matter of fact, I have a box of the world's famous chocolate, like that you'd sell when you were in band or whatever when you were a kid. I love that's like my favorite candy bar. I'm so weird. And I have some of those that I bought before I ever had a Built Bar. I'm still sitting there. I haven't even eaten them because it's just like, why would I have that when I can have a Built Bar? It's kind of weird, but we'll see how long. And I haven't got sick of them yet. That's what I thought I'd do. I'd get sick of them, but I haven't got sick of them yet. Paul Benoit, great quick question with respect to Chris Vezina. Is it a positive or negative that he's visiting alone? Is it better when a group is visiting together? I was going to say this real quick. Ryan, we'll move on to the next one. Paul, it just depends on the kid. That's the big thing. It depends on the kid and what you're trying to accomplish from the visit. If you really need to connect with a kid and bond with him, and it may be better that it's just him. If it's kind of in closing mode, it may be good to get him on campus around a lot of the. Some kids want to be alone. Some kids want to be on campus alone because they want to be able to just control,
evaluate.
Yeah, they evaluate you. They want to have all your time because they have a lot of questions. I mean, that's part of it. Some kids want to be on campus with other players. Every kid is different, and every situation is different. So it just depends. There's really no one true answer to that. There's one good answer for some kids, but even then, sometimes it's good to bring a kid by himself and then later bring him back with more people. It just varies, to be honest with you.
Agree.
Jeff Natkis, is it true that Notre Dame's recruiting budget is the same as a mid-level Big Ten school? Hear that a couple times and just wonder why. It's not true. There are so many false things to go around about Notre Dame. And I can't believe Brian Kelly only makes $1 million. If you think Brian Kelly only made $1 million, I got some real estate, I got this island off of the East Coast of Virginia that I'd like to sell you. No, you can't visit it. Just trust me. It's there. I mean, Notre Dame is a private school, right? Most big powers in football are public schools, which means they have to disclose everything that they submit because anyone can go, hey, I want a, freedom of information request, and you have to provide it. You can't hide that kind of thing. They're public schools. Notre Dame doesn't have to tell you a dang thing about what they spent on anything. And so there's just a lot of things kind of floating around that just, in my opinion, are inaccurate. You're going to tell me that Notre Dame has a similar recruiting budget to Iowa. That might have been true 10 years ago. It's not even close to being true now at all. So it's just not true. All right. God Country, Notre Dame, and barbecue. Can you guys talk about one or two Notre Dame players who you misevaluated the most? Like who came out of the shadows the most in your opinion? I'm going to give one that I was way wrong about in both directions. That's going to give you time to think about yours.
Yes.
I had just a friend of mine just said, put a hat on, you look naked. I just got that text message. I'm sorry. That just was really funny from a buddy. The guy that I thought was going to be really good that was just awful was Josh Barajas. When they flipped him from Penn State, man, I was like, oh, this kid's going to be so good. I loved his high school film. I thought he was going to be a dude. And then the opposite is I had Kyron Williams as one of the lowest ranked players in the 2019 class. I didn't think his body would transition to college. I just didn't think he'd be big enough to be an every down back in college. I thought he'd be like a situational guy, can catch the ball. He brought some value, but he'd just be this nice, solid player. I was very wrong on Kyron and I'm happy about that one. I'm not happy that I was wrong about Josh Barajas because I'm never happy when I'm wrong about a kid I like. I am always happy when a kid I didn't think could play ends up being good because that's good for Notre Dame. And what's good for Notre Dame is good for Irish Breakdown. So those are my two that are the most glaring that I can think of where I just like, wow, I was way off on those two guys.
Yeah, I actually thought of two guys that I thought were going to be really great or just very good and didn't end up materializing. One is Ishaq Williams. We've talked about that one a few times. Yeah. Max Railfield's the other one. I know Max obviously had some good moments, but obviously he was not quite the player that I thought he was going to be. And again, I know he missed his final year, so maybe that would have turned around a little bit, but he was definitely a disappointment for me. A guy, I mean, honestly, I remember when Notre Dame signed Cam Hart, and I was just like a 3-star raw, like wide receiver. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't that enthralled in it, to be honest with you. And then he's ended up developing to one of the better corners that we've had in a few years. So yeah, that would probably be one that I didn't evaluate correctly.
That's the part I didn't see him as a corner in college. I liked him a lot as a receiver. I didn't see him as a corner. So I'm with you on. But yeah, Ishaq I thought was going to be really good. Like really good. I mean, he was 6'6", 225, athletic, long, twitchy. Yeah. I just don't think he had it here. I don't think he loved football. if he had Stephon Tuitt's, if he had Aaron Lynch's like motor on the field, I think he could have been really good. Because I don't think football was important to him. And if you hear about kind of some of the things that, like, if I met his dad a few times, and his dad was like super into academics and all that, and then Ishak gets to Notre Dame, he's like having people do papers for him. Like, that's just laziness, right? Like, I know he was smarter than that. It's just laziness. And I think that was Ishak's big problem. He just was lazy. He just didn't love football. I had heard, however, that he had the light had gone on before the 2014 season. And the people were like thinking he was going to have a really breakout. It was going to be a senior year. Stephon was gone, and then he got suspended. And like, I would have really liked to have seen what he could have done if he wouldn't have been suspended. That would have been really interesting. Jason Burkhardt, I read an article recently about a total overall drop in attendance in college football games. Thoughts on why? I have two reasons. Three reasons, and two of them go together. One, cost. Because what you have to understand is cost of going to a game isn't just about the ticket price. The ticket price is a lot more, but flying is way more expensive. Hotels, these towns just jack hotel prices way up, and it's just not cheap to go to a game anymore. And it's very hard. Yeah, it's very hard to, if you're a father of four, it's become a rich man's game in a lot of instances with these places to really consistently go to games. I think the fact that games are so, every game's available now on TV. If you've got an HD TV and you've got, you can, it's really clear. You can sit at home. And we can't dismiss the impact that COVID had, right? And what I mean by that is, take the attendance from 2020 away, because of course, but there's still a lot of people I know that, not a lot, there's still people that we know that like are still afraid to go out, right? And be in public. And there's still people that like, I saw one recently, like had 2 masks on and a face shield. I'm like, and people are like, I don't want to be around other people that aren't masked or don't know. There's a lot of fear. It's about fear that people have. Understandable, some not understandable in other instances, but I think that factors into it as well. I also think that as we were kind of locked down in our homes, a lot of people just got real comfortable just at home. I know people that don't grocery shop anymore. It's just, I'll just do Shipt. I'll do this. I'll do that. I'll have DoorDash or whatever else to deliver food. Just don't go out anymore. And people have just gotten comfortable just living in their bubbles. I think that's one of the things I'm concerned about when it just culturally, but I'm speaking more from a sports standpoint. I think it's helped our business, right? Because when they're home, they're in a room like this, they're in a chat, they're on the message board. But I think in regards to fans being out and being at games and just that part of it, I think that's hurt. I was really disappointed with the attendance of the Fiesta Bowl this year. Really disappointed. Especially when it was, the first game of the Marcus Freeman era. Like, that's the reason I spent, well, I don't know how much I spent. It was a lot of money to fly my dad and myself and my nephew down there. But it was like, I was like, man, I'm like waiting on people to show up. And I was like, nope. Like, I get it, because it cost thousands of dollars. Unless you lived in Southern California or Arizona, it's going to cost you thousands of dollars. Forget the cost of the ticket. That wasn't a problem. Well, tickets are only this. If you show up the day of the game, you get a ticket for cheap. That's not the problem. I can afford to be able to actually show up there. You know what I mean? Like, and I think those are part of the problems too, is it's cost of travel to get to a game is problematic too. So I think those things have all kind of combined to where attendance is down this year. What I'm more curious about is does it creep up over the next couple of years because people kind of get over the COVID fears? Once more people start realizing, hey, we got to live with this, like we do other things that could, be dangerous to you. You got to learn to live with it. More people that currently don't like going out will start going out again. Does that cause it to tick back up? Or is it just kind of like you realize, you know what? I didn't go to games the last 2 years after going for 30 years. And you know what I realized? I'm good. I kind of like being at home. I had a few extra $1,000 in my bank account this year because I didn't get to fly out to games in 2020, and does that cause more people to say, hey, I don't care about being there anymore? Or is it going to be a thing where now that there's less of that fear and hopefully prices can kind of come back down to normal, that it causes the tennis to go back up? That's what I'm curious about, Ryan, to see if it peaks, if it's kind of bottomed out and it's going to go back up. I'm very curious to see that in a lot of ways.
That's very interesting. It's very interesting. I think it obviously highlighted a lot of great points. I personally, I went out for the Notre Dame Cincinnati game, and you're right, man. It is expensive to go to a football game, especially when you don't live nearby. And I mean, especially with I know this is directly around college football, so it's not just Notre Dame, but I live 10 hours away from Notre Dame, right? So Notre Dame is a national brand where it's not just South Bend, Indiana. There's the only people that care about Notre Dame. It's a national thing. Right. People are coming from all over the place, and it's expensive to go to games. It really is.
Right. And I mean, you guys took an RV out, right? I mean, so that saved time or saved money, but you lost time.
Yeah.
You know,
hey, man, filling up gas on an RV is expensive though too. I mean, that's not easy.
Yeah, it's true. That's true. But there was 4 of you, right?
Yep.
Well, I'm thinking of what it would cost for 4 of you to fly to Notre Dame, fly to Chicago, get a car, drive to South Bend, or take the train, get a hotel in the area. Right. You know, you add all that stuff up together, I'm pretty sure it's not going to equal the gas money for the RV. You know what I mean?
Fair point.
But a lot of people can't afford to take 20 hours over the course of a weekend to drive and drive back. You know, fortunately for you, your boss now is a lot more accommodating for things like that than the boss you would have had in the past.
That's true.
Your boss now would be more understanding of you wanting to come out to a Notre Dame game. I'm just saying.
It's fair. It's fair.
But and I've told you can always park your RV in my driveway anytime you want. So
yes, sir.
But I'm very curious what it's going to, because one thing is bowl game, the TV stuff for all bowl games is up, right? Is that because more people are just watching games now and don't care as much about the other stuff or not? I don't have an answer for that. So it's a very, very good question. Michael Campbell says, I think having legends on the recruiting trail would be huge for top 25 guys like Joe Montana in Dante Moore's house. I don't think they can go to the house or Tim Brown and Cardinal Tate's home with parents and family. I don't think they can do that. I don't think a representative of the school can't just go to a kid's home. They can do things where they meet them and talk to them, but I don't think they can go in the home. But to your point, Michael, I do agree there's a ton of value to having those greats around, those legends around when kids are on campus. I mean, if Marcus Freeman, because Joe Montana didn't like Brian Kelly, can Marcus Freeman kind of, repair that bridge that was burned? I don't know, but if he can, it'd be great to have Joe Montana around. I have my feelings on Joe Montana in my couple interactions with him, but that doesn't have anything to do with recruiting. I think it'd be a lot of value to recruits to have Joe Montana around, or have Joe Theismann around, and have Tim Brown, Rocket Ismail, Golden Tate, Brady Quinn, all these great players back on campus. And when Dante Moore, imagine if it's they had a thing on, I have to find out the legality, but let's just say it was legal to do this, but Dante Moore comes on a visit and they take him out to dinner on his official, and he's having dinner with, it's him and his parents and Tommy Reese and Marcus Freeman. And then also that table is Brady Quinn, Joe Montana, Joe Theismann, right? Those guys. Oh, and then Tim Brown and Jerome Bettis and all those guys are at the table. And it's just man, you don't think that'd have an impact? Heck yeah, that'd have an impact. So yeah, I'm with you on that. I think it would be really cool to have, Michael. The one thing you can't do is have them in the home. But that's something that Coach Freeman is working on, is making those guys more of a part of what they're doing. John A1. Is Jacob Lacey working to get back to 295? John, I don't think he's looking to get back to 295. I do think he's looking to obviously put more weight on. He had to get down to, it wasn't a number he had to get down to. He had to get down to just the shoulder caused him to lose weight, is more of how it was. And they didn't want to kind of push him back up too soon. Just kind of let it happen naturally. But now that he's over a year removed from that surgery, I think that's when you're going to start to see, sort of a jump in size. I think 285 is closer to what they'd like him to be. Last couple of questions before we get out of here. Patrick Hennessy says, what would your preference on channel and kickoff time for the Ohio State game? Big noon on Fox or prime time on ABC? I'd rather be a big noon game, to be completely honest with you. I just feel like, being on the road, I don't like night games on the road just because you're sitting in the hotel all day. It's not like you can go out anywhere. It's not like you're sitting in your own room. You're just all stuck in a hotel till, like 4:00 when you start heading to the stadium. I like the idea of on the road. Now, home games, I like night games at home, but for road games, I prefer to kind of get up and get right into your ritual. Get up, have breakfast, go to your meeting at the hotel, get your stuff, get on the bus, head to the stadium, get dressed, get taped, get your treatment, get out there and go through stretch, get out there and go through warm-ups, get loose, come back, get dressed, go through stretch and so the moment you get up, you're starting to get into your mindset into it's game time. I prefer that when I'm on the road. I just feel like that helps the road team. An earlier game just really, I think, helps the road team kind of get their minds right compared to a night game and against that type of team. That's just kind of my personal preference to be honest with you about what I kind of prefer. So here we go. Last question. I think this is going to be the last one. Justin Carlson says, if Notre Dame plays in the college football playoff this year, what opponent would you want them to draw and who could realistically make it and gives Notre Dame the best chance at getting a college football playoff win? So first of all, Justin, I don't want Notre Dame's first college football playoff to win to just be over some team that they should be. Like, I don't want them to get in and play Cincinnati or Michigan State and beat that team. Like, Washington from 2016. I want them to get in and beat somebody big. I think that to me would be more of a greater example of, hey, they've arrived. So when I look at teams this year that I think have a chance to be in the playoff, this is super early, Justin. I mean, we haven't got to spring ball yet. There's other things, but just super, super early thoughts. The SEC, I think that obviously Alabama and Georgia are going to have chances to be competitive for the college football playoff this year. Texas A&M is a team that a lot of people talk about. I got to see them. I got to see that offense get a lot better. I think their defense should be pretty good. They got to replace Mike Elko. That's going to be a loss. They got a lot to prove to me. I'm not on the Texas A&M bandwagon like others. So I think Georgia and Alabama, the two players there. Big 12. Maybe Oklahoma. I'm curious to see what kind of jump Texas makes this year. That's a team that I have my eye on, but I don't think either one of the Big 12 teams are necessarily great. We don't know what the Brent Venables coach team is going to look like. They might be better. They might actually play defense, under Brent Venables. So we'll kind of see how that plays out. Pac-12, I don't see any playoff teams coming out of the Pac-12. Big 10, Ohio State's going to be a playoff contender this year. I definitely see them as a possible playoff contender. I think Clemson will be a playoff contender again, depending upon what happens with them against Notre Dame. So I think that's going to play a big role, the Notre Dame game, because I think most of the games on their schedule are very winnable for Clemson. I don't know how the new coaching is going to go. I don't see a lot of great teams in college football again this year. I really don't. I think Bama's going to be really good, because now they've got a lot of young receivers, but now they've got the whole offseason to get those guys ready as opposed to just, one spot, 15 practices for one spot, but then the other spots just kind of comes up in the middle of the game. The offensive line is going to be interesting. I think they're going to be better coached on the offensive line this year, getting that guy from Kentucky. I've said all along, I didn't think Doug Maroney was going to do a great job there. He was always going to have his mind on kind of the next job. But I don't love Bill Bryant as an OC. He's got a lot of talent. And, defensively, they're going to have some really good players coming back. They lost some guys, but they had some guys make decisions come back that I was a little surprised by. And there's some young players I really like. Will Anderson and Dallas Turner is going to be a nasty edge combination next year for Alabama. So I think Alabama is going to be really good again. I think Georgia is going to be really good again. After that, I just, Big 12, I don't see anybody great unless Texas just kind of comes out of nowhere or Oklahoma's way better than we think. Who's their quarterback going to be? That's Pac-12, no. Ohio State, I mean, look, I'm not a believer in Ohio State till I see their defense show me something. You can't win a title with defense that bad. I mean, Ohio State's bordering on being what Oklahoma was. I mean, that's kind of where the direction Ohio State is going. I mean, gave up 45 points to Utah this year. Gave up, I mean, think about this. The last 2 postseason games Ohio State has played in, they gave up, 54? What did they give up to Bama in the championship game 2 years ago? I think they gave up 54, right? They gave up 45 this year to Utah, and then they gave up 52 last year to Alabama. So Ohio State's supposed to be this phenomenal football team that everybody thinks has a chance to win a national championship, and they focus on the offense. But the thing they forget is the last 2 postseason games, Ohio State's given up 48.5 points per game in their last 2 playoff games, or last 2 postseason games. One of them against Utah. So, I mean, they got a lot to prove to me. But should they be a playoff team? Yeah, I think they'll be a playoff team. I think they're going to stomp Michigan this year, and I think the West is going to be more competitive this year. I think the Big Ten West is going to be better. I think the Big Ten East is going to take a step back. Yeah, I think Penn State's going to be better, but not great. Michigan's not going to be as good. Michigan State's not going to be as good. I think Wisconsin's going to be better. I think they made some really good coaching moves this offseason. Getting Bob Bostad back to the O-line is going to be huge for them. Love Jim Leonard. Quarterback, they should be better quarterback this year, you'd think. Good talent around them. I think Minnesota's going to be better. They also made some good coaching moves, getting rid of some guys they shouldn't have had in the first place. Tanner Morgan's back. Ibrahim is back. The running back is back. They have a lot of guys coming back. The O-line, they got to replace some dudes, but I think Minnesota's going to be better. Iowa should be really good. They got a ton coming back this year. So I think the West is going to be better, meaning I don't see them as playoff teams, but could one of those teams upset Ohio State? That's going to be the question mark. So if Ohio State beats Notre Dame, I think they're going to be tough to keep out of the playoffs. So I think those are the teams to look at. But look, I want Notre Dame to beat the teams. I want them to beat an Alabama, a Georgia, an Ohio State. I want them to beat an Oklahoma. I want them to beat a team like that. I don't want them to beat Michigan State, upsets Ohio State like they did in 2015 and Notre Dame beats them. I don't want to see that. I want to see them beat Clemson. I want to see them beat Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, somebody like that. Those are the wins that change your program. Just getting a playoff win over Cincinnati or Michigan State to me doesn't move the needle if you then go out and lose to that A team in the next round. If you go lose to Bama in the championship, they're like, oh, Notre Dame arrived because they beat Cincinnati. I don't think that's going to be the case. They need to beat one of those teams. If you want to be on the level of one of those teams, you got to beat them. And that's what I would like to see Notre Dame do. I'd like to see them beat those teams. That's truly going to tell me that they've taken that final step. So that would be it for me. So that's going to do it for today's show. Another long mailbag. I love these. Our attendance just stayed high. You guys and gals are all awesome. So really, really, really appreciate all of you. Appreciate it a lot. And good show. Make sure you check out the Irish Breakdown message board at boards@irishbreakdown.com. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell before you get out of here. We would greatly appreciate that. That always helps us out. If we talked about Built Bar a couple times, there's a link in the description bar below that talks about, you can you click on that link and you go purchase whatever you want. Make sure that the Irish Breakdown code is in there. You get 10% off your whole purchase. Our merch store has some cool stuff. I just sent Sean a bunch of cool merch stuff yesterday, so we got that going on. And we'll be back tomorrow. Sean and I will be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern to talk about something Notre Dame football related. We haven't quite decided on a topic yet, but I think something I would find fun to do is with some of those Saturday topics is for you all to kind of send us stuff on Twitter, send me ideas on my email, but especially on Twitter, just send some ideas on some things that you'd like for us to discuss, some bigger picture things or more, finer point things that you'd like to hear us discuss in some of these shows. So everybody have a great rest of your day. And thank you all so very much for being a part of the Irish Breakdown podcast.